Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the November 4th meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. Council, up first, we have the consent agenda regarding the minutes of the council meeting held October 21st, 2024, the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting held 2028, and approval of the council meeting agenda. Do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendations? Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any errors, omissions, or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carries unanimous. Thank you. Next up, we have two delegations today, Council. We have the first delegation is from the SPCA for a program and services update, a presentation by C. Baunik and Durante of the SPCA to give an update on the services provided by the BC SPCA. So welcome. Did I get the names right?
Yes, you did.
Except it's Italian, not French. Durante.
Durante? Durante?
That's from Jimmy.
Yes, I remember
Thank
Jimmy.
you.
Yes. Not many of us here left that do remember Jimmy, but yes, I do. Thank you. Well, welcome. And we're looking forward to your presentation. You have 10 minutes for your presentation, so take it away.
Wonderful. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so it's
Here.
working? Yeah, okay, wonderful.
Loud and clear. Thank you.
My name is Corey. I'm here on behalf of the provincial office of the BC SPCA, and I'm here with my colleague Nadine, who manages the local BC SPCA Community Animal Center. And we're just here to give a little update on our activities over the past year and a half since we performed the pound keeping services on behalf of the city of Parksville. So we're here just to share a little bit about what's been going on. So I'm not sure how many of these little guys are left, but all of these animals were at the Parksville location. Maybe you can let us know, Nadine. Is Oscar still around or has he been adopted?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good news too. So, so we were established in 1895.
Is that Oscar? Is that Oscar?
This is Oscar. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's good. We just got to get the names right.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
Oscar.
Absolutely.
But Oscar's been adopted.
He has been adopted. So, but there are many other lovely kitties. If anyone is interested, they can come talk to Nadine afterwards. So we are the only organization in the province other than RCMP and local police that can enforce the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And not many people know we are a registered charity. So other than the funding that we get from municipal governments to perform the pound keeping services, we don't actually receive any other government funding on a regular basis. We might get the odd grant from the provincial government. For example, recently we had some to renovate some of our older locations that the province felt were in very important areas for animal welfare. But otherwise, all of our programs are funded by our generous donors. So this is Belle. And you can see she's showing off her beautiful mission and vision statement. We're in the middle of actually revisiting our strategic plan and looking forward to the next 50 years. There's been a lot of changes in the animal welfare world since COVID, as like with everything else. So we are planning on releasing more information to the general public probably just after the new year. But it will be very similar to this. We're just, again, kind of tweaking things a little bit and looking more to, how can we, rather than relying on bringing all animals into one center, make use of the wonderful people in our community to help with animals as well. And utilizing technology that's grown quite a bit since the pandemic too, to help us with that. Is Belle still available? No, she's gone too. Oh, that's good. Oh, good. That's amazing. Yeah. Okay, so for the Parksville contract, so we operate a fully equipped animal center. I believe we just perform pound keeping for dogs in Parksville, if that's correct, right? But we do accept other animals that might be straying or abandoned under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. So we do accept many, many different species. We hold any strayed or lost dogs until their owners are able to come pick them up. We also sell dog licenses, animal adoptions, of course, for animals that, they weren't redeemed or they were surrendered by their owner. They weren't able to keep them anymore. Spay and neuter services, when we have an ongoing program, we are looking at our programs and sort of updating them. So it sort of depends on what funding we have at the time and veterinarian availability. And then dog licenses too. So this is for 2023. We are kind of looking at the last calendar year. So I apologize, these numbers are probably a little different now to do year to date for 2024, but we took in 21 dogs, 23 cats, and 1 turtle from the jurisdiction of the city of Parksville. And 9 cats and 18 dogs were returned to their owners. So that is pretty common. We do see many more dogs redeemed than cats, but that's still not too bad because Canada on average, it's about I'd say 15 to 20% redemption rate for cats, and this is almost 50%. So quite good for cats. It is something that we're trying to work on as part of our education campaigns that, people may want to encourage their cats to try out a harness, to walk on a leash, to give their cat time outside. I know not everyone, is willing to do that. A lot of times people like to let their cats wander, but unfortunately they can wander quite far and the owners aren't able to find them and they don't think to call us. So, or catio. Catios are a great option too. And then if animals are not picked up after the 72-hour stray, so the animals that are, minus the 9 cats and 18 dogs, we take care of those, make sure they get any veterinary care that they need, do behavioral assessments and put them up for adoption. Do you know what happened to the turtle? No. Oh, we'll have to find out.
It's many hundreds of animals later. Sorry.
Yes, no, I understand. It's been 11 months later after the turtle. Yeah, absolutely. So, and actually, as you can see here, so this is our total number of animals that we cared for in 2023 was 256. So we do take in quite a few animals through other sources than just the city of Parksville. We had 208 adoptions, and we also offered 68 nights of emergency boarding. So emergency boarding is completely funded through our generous donors. It's meant to be used for people who may be experiencing temporary loss in housing. They may have to go into the hospital for care and no one else can take care of their animal. It's absolutely free. If anyone is in need of emergency boarding, they can just call our animal helpline number and start the process. But it's a really valuable program just to help out those who really are, worried about their animal, but need to focus on themselves for a little bit. We also offer the pet food bank, and that includes also pet supplies. So kitty litter and things like that, dog leashes, collars, again, funded through our donors. Animal protection investigations are all across the province. And then we also have humane education. The emergency response and support has been a growing area for us just in the last 5-6 years, a lot more with the floods, wildfires. Of course, it was, I think 2 years ago, we had the Port Alberni fires. So the emergency boarding program can be extended past 2 weeks if people aren't able to yet return to their homes. But we try to work with hotels and other short-term housing setups to ensure that they're pet friendly if possible, even providing supplies if they need it. And that's it from us. So that's Nadine's information. There's my information. If anyone has any questions that they think of later on, they can contact us, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that Mayor and Council may have right now.
Great. Well, thanks, Corey, very much for the information and your presentation. And what's this guy's name?
Oh, I don't see a name on there. Maybe we forgot to put it on.
Oh, no.
Not sure.
It's for the council to decide the name.
Oh, yeah.
He looks pretty anxious.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for your presentation.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I love seeing the pictures, and that truly speaks to what you do. And thank you for that. I have one quick question. I heard a couple of points that you made here, Corey. So the SPCA is, I understand, a charity, and so that it's they able to issue tax receipts for that.
Yes.
So here's your commercial. So everybody who's listening, if you do a donation to the SPCA, it is tax deductible. So that's a good thing. So everybody can keep that in mind. You had another term, you said would, it was one of the cats you had up there, and it said the catios are always available.
Oh,
Catio?
yes.
Right, I'm just not familiar with that term.
Yeah, catios are.
Rhymes with patio, so I'm guessing maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's essentially like an enclosed patio. So we do have some ideas on our website that people can build. So if you, again, have a cat that likes the outdoors, but maybe it's not a good idea for it to go outside. Again, a lot of cats, they can unfortunately be, hurt or go missing when they're wandering around. You can essentially put up like different types of netting and maybe some shelves. And it's covered so that even in the rain, if the cat wants to go sit and get some fresh air, it's dry and yeah, can enjoy the outdoors. So
Kinda
yeah,
like
they're
it.
fun.
Kind of like going to the spa.
Yeah, exactly. And they can listen to the birds, even though they can't get and eat the birds. Yeah. So that's another concern too, right? So
Birds
yeah.
outside kind of taunting them.
Yes. Chit chattering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you for clearing that up.
My
Thank you so much.
pleasure.
Counselor, I was just gonna say, no, I was gonna say Gore, no, I was just gonna say Amit, but I'll be formal. Counselor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. Thank you for the services that you provide in Parksville and Oceanside, I guess.
Thank you.
In broader terms. Can you speak a little bit about the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, and within that act and maybe other powers that you have as a society for taking care of animals, how closely do you work with City of Parksville Bylaw? And what has that working relationship been, and how has it evolved recently?
That's a great question. I can't speak too much in terms of our Animal Protection Department and bylaw. I don't know if Nadine would know or not, but I will answer just the other part of that. So depending on the city's bylaw, they may or may not be able to address animal welfare concerns. And I have to admit, I'm not that familiar with the Parksville bylaw, just because we don't perform animal control services here. We do for the city of Port Alberni, for example. So if the city does have animal welfare concerns in the bylaw, a lot of times they can be addressed much quicker because you can issue a fine, whereas with the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, there needs to be a higher level of evidence that cruelty is occurring, and then it's passed along to Crown to determine whether or not to press charges. And we all know sometimes charges go through, sometimes they don't. So it is much longer process. But that being said, many municipalities just don't feel like they have the bandwidth at the moment to address those extra concerns, which is why we're sort of a safety net in those situations. So yeah. And I will just add, sorry, Councillor Gar, we do flag to our Animal Protection Department if there are any welfare concerns for the strays coming in from the bylaw officers. Yeah, from City of Parksville. Nadine, do you have anything to add to that?
Other than it would be great, sort of resource for the bylaw officers to have our animal helpline number. So that
Yes,
if they do
we can
witness
pass that
or
along
they're
to
on
staff.
calls,
Okay,
to
Mhm,
absolutely use that number to file any calls of concern.
mhm. Great point. Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
that's a good point. We'll take note of that.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Counselor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When you give a donation and you say BC SPCA, does the money the funds go to the overall, or can you make it out for Parksville and have it designated? How does it work within the SPCA?
Yeah. Do you
Thank
wanna, Nadine would be great to answer that one. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
It is certainly earmarked for the local branch. You would want to put down the Parksville, Qualicum Beach and District BC SPCA when you're writing your checkout. But it is earmarked for the branch and our budget, but we are, as a whole, the animals don't have postal codes, and so we need to take care of all of them throughout the province. So wherever the highest need is. But obviously, we don't, the income coming in as a not-for-profit organization, we're not covering the costs, and so we look upon other districts, municipalities, and other communities throughout BC to help support the animals here in Oceanside as well. So it is shared up, but it is earmarked for the branch that you're wanting to donate to.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Is there anything that the center is looking for right now in terms of donations for like the pet food bank or anything in particular? If people are wondering?
Always welcome to donate to the local food bank.
Okay.
And drop off at our shelter as well. People often are coming into the shelter when they're struggling and in need. So we welcome and thank you very much for that. So there's that. And then obviously if the general public wants to help in other ways other than in a monetary way, we can always use gift certificates for different animal places, companies here and locally, so we can actually support our local businesses as well for animal needs.
Thanks, Nadine.
Thank you. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through to the delegation. Thank you very much for your presentation, and the photos certainly add a lot to it. Absolutely. In the past, I understand that there were opportunities for volunteer dog walkers at the local branch. And I think at one time I knew someone who wasn't able to have a dog herself, but she would go and volunteer and walk dogs there. So I just wonder if that's still available. And again, an opportunity to advertise this if it is possible.
Thank you for doing so and asking. Yes, always opportunities for many aspects of volunteering and supporting us at the local branch and throughout the province. We all need some help. Fostering is huge, dog walking, cat socialization. There's many ways to volunteer, and we absolutely rely so heavily upon volunteerism in our communities. I mean, there's many more volunteer positions than there are paid staff positions as a not-for-profit organization. So we need that, we rely on it, and absolutely just please go online, and any available opportunities are listed, what the local branch would need. So for our branch, dog walking, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to what Nadine said as well, in regarding fostering, it's a really fun way to get the whole family involved, and that frees us up to accept more, maybe owner surrenders, emergency boarding, so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's especially if you have young children and maybe you like to travel, you don't want to commit to having a pet full time. You can, maybe just for a couple months a year, be open to fostering a cat or a dog or a rabbit, and all of the supplies to care for the animal and the vet care are all covered. We supply all of that for you. So, yeah.
And Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the presentation, both Corey and Nadine, and the work that you do. Question about rabbits. I think the populations are pretty good out there. I've had questions from people who have brought rabbits into their home as pets, who have tried to have them spay and neutered and control the population around their property. What can you tell us a little bit about rabbits and what people should and shouldn't do?
Yeah, I can take that one unless you want to answer.
Go ahead.
Okay.
It's a hot one.
It's a hot one, especially on the island, and I live in the Lower Mainland in Richmond. It's a hot one there too. So, yeah, I think a couple points stood out to me about your question. So, the first one is people taking the rabbits into their homes as pets, and that is legally a bit of a gray area because they're considered a sort of feral or semi-feral. It's not necessarily the same as taking, a rock pigeon into your home, for example, but some of those feral rabbits do better than others in a home just from a welfare perspective because they may be friendly and come take veggies from your hand out in the wild, but they have the opportunity to run away. And so when they're in the home, we notice in our centers, at least, a lot of them just tend to shut down and they don't do very well. You also want to make sure, anytime you get a rabbit, that it's vaccinated against RHD, which is what decimated a lot of the rabbit populations a couple of years ago. It's very contagious and very fatal for rabbits. And so that's something just to be aware of, regardless of where your rabbit comes from. All of the rabbits that we have are all automatically vaccinated for RHD. And spaying and neutering, definitely, rabbits breed like rabbits. And so, yeah, you want to make sure, again, if you have a rabbit as a pet, and if there's any chance it could get outside, or even if you don't think there's a chance, please make sure spayed or neutered, and we spay and neuter all of our adoptable rabbits. On our website, and I'd be happy to send this along to staff, we do have some amazing printouts on how to live better alongside wild animals, including rabbits. We sort of classify them as wild. And different ways to sort of rabbit proof your yard, because not everyone wants rabbits in their gardens chewing their, nice herbs that they've been growing all summer. So we have great examples of how to handle that. Including, some rabbits, or sorry, like the feral rabbits are technically considered Schedule C, which means invasive, meaning they can legally be destroyed. But of course, if that is the case, it should be done humanely, and those papers list those as well. So yeah, I mean, just because they're Schedule C doesn't mean that people can just go around bopping them on the head or anything like that. So, so yeah, we do provide that information. We want to make sure people can live peacefully alongside those species. So, yeah, my pleasure.
That's great. Any other questions, council, at this time? Seeing none, I will just thank you very much for your presentation.
you.
And thank you for all you do.
Thank you very much.
Really dear to many of our hearts. So take care of those critters. Yeah,
Thank
we
you very
appreciate
much.
it. Thank you. Our next delegation is regarding the Parksville Community Park Mobi-Mat updates, a presentation by Art Yetchen of the Access Oceanside Association to follow up on the trial installation of the Mobi-Mats at the Parksville Community Park Beach, including findings on uses, daily maintenance requirements, and an impact on 5-year financial plan requirement for a more permanent service. Welcome, Ralph.
Thank you very much.
You have 10 minutes, but here
It's
you
nice
go.
to be
You've been
back.
here before, so.
I have been here
yeah,
before
that's
and
good.
I will try to keep it brief.
Nice to see. This is on the other side of the times when you're here, when we're looking for Mobi-Mats. Now we've got them, so now we can talk about the Mobi-Mat.
Exactly. Now
Yeah.
we know more.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to get right into it, and that was obviously the wrong button. Just a second here. There we go. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you. We had our inauguration ceremony and we said a lot of thank yous to everybody, but I'd like to put it on the official record that we want to thank you, Mayor O'Brien, Councillor Gore. You were both instrumental in making this happen. It was a very short time period that we were dealing with, a lot of different angles to consider, and you all jumped on board, and we really, really appreciate that. And also to all the staff. We don't really even know who all was involved aside from the Parks Department, but I'm sure that there were a lot of people that were engaged, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
So I also want to thank Graham Giddens. He was terrific with all his ideas, bouncing ways of doing it off of him and going back and forth with him. He was a tremendous resource. He worked with neighboring communities to find out what they did and came up with what I think is best practice in the area. The installation was fantastic. To make it happen so fast, in such, again, tight circumstances was really encouraging. So we want to thank him and his team. And just because I also want to put it on the record, Blaine Sipples from Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism, Lisa McCourt from Beach Club Resort, we were gifted these 2 beach wheelchairs, and the issue was more, how do we get them out to the public? And again, Amit was the door opener, had great ideas, great insights on how we could possibly get this going, and Blaine and Lisa jumped in, and it's been a tremendous success. We got great feedback from users on how helpful they were, their staff were on getting these beach wheelchairs out into the beach. And I want to thank everybody behind me at Access Oceanside, because it was a stressful time for us and trying to get this done in such short notice. And with their support, without their support, I wouldn't have been able to work with you as well as we did. So, yes. Okay, so this was from my original presentation, and I put a big green check mark because somebody somewhere has this sitting in their office, and you can now tick off 0.6.2. It's done. Okay, so that was the good news. What I wanted to go through a little bit was how we got here, and this was all thanks to an out-of-the-blue donation from Corona Labatt's Canada, who launched an Accessing Paradise program. They did a couple beaches back east, and they offered us the Mobi-Mats to to be installed this summer. It was a little bit of a stressful time. There were too many people involved between Corona and the facilitator, et cetera, et cetera. And I won't get into all the details, but it really, when the opportunity came up and we were able to come to you and ask for your support on this, you jumped on very quickly, had to iron out some details, which we got through, and thankfully the donor went along with it, so we were able to get this going. So from March to July, there was a lot of work done by a lot of people, but we got it done, and that was what was most important for us. And I think as a trial installation, it was a perfect scenario. So some learnings. So I went down almost every day down to the beach out of curiosity more than anything, but also to see what does it really involve. As you mentioned in the original presentation, 2 tides a day. We don't know what they would bring every day, and well, we had some learnings. So almost after every high tide, there was an accumulation of seaweed, pebbles, some larger rocks, occasionally a log drift up against the mat. And so those things had to be dealt with. So I had a good working relationship with Warren from, I believe it's Warren, from the Parks office.
Okay.
And I sent him a daily report on what I found, and he either sent down a crew if there was something heavier, like a log that had to be taken care of, or addressed issues like the bunching up of sand and rocks underneath the mat, which made them quite unsteady and uneven. Interesting learning, the top middle photograph there, that was the matching point between the 2 mat sections. And that was always accumulating and becoming quite a bulge. And what they found was they loosened up that joint and allowed the sand and the pebbles to kind of flow underneath it. And that really was a wonderful learning. So the idea is don't tighten it down onto the beach so tight, let it float a little bit, let the material move. And that solved a lot of the problems. It was, I think, 2 weeks where nothing had to be done, basically. It just took care of itself. So that was the good news. There were times when staff would have to go down, and I would assume it would take them maybe an hour or so for 2 people, and usually involved just raking and evening out the bulges underneath. And it's important that it be done because people are relying on an even, steady surface, and especially if there's a hole in there. I saw personally someone stumble on a hole when the mat all of a sudden went down a few inches. So it's important work that has to be done, and it has to be done daily for monitoring, and I would say on average, weekly was somebody actually had to get in there and even things out. So the reception by the community was, for me, the most amazing element of the whole thing. So as Access Oceanside, we're looking to remove barriers for people with disabilities to be able to participate fully in our community. So the initial target group, well, the mat was inaugurated July 17th at 12:39. The first person here got down to the end of the mat and onto the beach. I won't name names.
I'm on it.
But it was great. It was really a joyous moment. The secondary target group that we use, hey, don't forget the people with wagons and strollers. Well, that took a little longer. That was 6 minutes later. And you can see the barriers are still up in the area. So the adoption was almost immediate. And I took this picture at 12:53, and this was not even 20 minutes later. Everybody was using the mat. And at Access Oceanside, we talk a lot about universal access. And to me, this is the poster for universal access, in that everybody uses the mat for their own personal reasons. Maybe they just want to go barefoot. Maybe they have a little bit of walking difficulty, but they don't need a disability device or anything to make the trip. So I took it a little bit farther. This was the August long weekend on the Sunday, on the afternoon, and I went down with my little trusty counter to see what is the usage really like. And it was amazing. So I saw 7 persons using disability devices, be they walking sticks, a couple strollers, 28 persons with strollers, 56 people pulling wagons, and boy, are those wagons loaded. I even saw a double tandem wagon going down. It was pretty amazing. 64 dogs. And I'm a former dog owner, and I thought this is not something I would have dreamed of, that the dogs would be using it so much. And you can see how much it was used. A trip was one person walking down the mat past those first logs, either direction. 1,893 trips in 3 hours. Now, this is a peak of the peak days. It was a beautiful day, but it just shows you how it was used. And not many people went around or across the rocks in any other way. They used the mat. It really was or has become the entrance to the beach, to the point where some people are saying, well, we need another one because this is getting too crowded. And it's true. There were traffic jams at the mat. There were people at the end of the mat waiting for people to come down, but people were always coming down, so they couldn't get back up. You know, I thought, okay, you can cross the rocks, but no, they were determined to walk on the mat. So interesting social dynamics. But it was good news. So I did some personal estimates of what does it take, because I think it's important to have a feel for how much staff time is going into it. The mats were donated by Labatt's Corona Canada, so there's no capital cost, but the maintenance is important. The original maintenance installation took all day. It took 3 people and with a backhoe in order to be able to lift the anchors and position the anchors and everything. Now the anchors are in, so that's not really required anymore. All that has to happen is the mats have to be rolled out and connected to the anchors that are already there and being marked with very nice little red and white buoys marked City of Parksville. One's disappeared, by the way. I saw it today. So I would estimate 3 people at 4 hours each. Daily maintenance, personal experience, 15 minutes does it. 1 man with broom, 1 man with a blower. You could cut that down to 5 minutes a day. The weekly maintenance, and that's again just an estimate, doing some leveling, maybe moving a log a couple hours a week. And the deinstallation would be even easier. It's rolling it up, but I think the work would have to happen in the operations yard. It's cleaning off all the debris and everything from the mat so that they're ready for the next season. So I'm going to leave the calculations to you and your colleagues on what that means in terms of a budget element. But to our calculation, this is roughly the amount of staff time that would be involved from the Parks Department or facilities or maintenance or whomever would be delegated to. So there's always an ask. So what we are asking is that the trial was, to our mind, a tremendous success. The mats do work. We would like to see the City of Parksville incorporate this as a permanent service into the 5-year financial plan to the benefit of us, our neighbors, all our visitors. And that the second element be that we would like to divest ourselves as Access Oceanside as owner of the mats and don't make it a formal donation to the city so the mats become the property of the city and that you have control of them, which you, for all intents and purposes, do already. The last ask is down the road at some point. They will probably have to be replaced, or maybe 1 or 2 sections would have to be replaced due to normal wear and tear, and that you consider it in your capital budget for replacement of 1 or more sections of the mats. Because in Parksville, it's all about the beach. Thank you. Any questions? Comments?
Thanks. Thank you very
You're welcome.
much, Ralph. Just up front of the slide that you had showing the amount of hours for cleaning and so forth, has that been forwarded to staff yet?
No.
Okay, if you could,
Yes.
that information, you've gone to a lot of trouble. You've been down there watching out almost daily, apparently. So I think that would be helpful anyways for us anyways when preparing our financial plan.
Yeah.
So we can have accurate discussions, and I thank you for that.
Certainly, and I would welcome their feedback as well. If they found it was less or more, it'd be interesting too, from their perspective.
Yes, and I can confirm that we recently have had conversations with Graham and so forth that said that the mats are all tucked away at their operations yard after they were totally pressure washed down, put away. They're nicely hibernating for the season, and but they're happy and clean, and so they're ready to go for the next season. So I can confirm that has happened already.
Great.
So that's amazing. Your slide and your Your comments about the amount of trips in one day just blew me away.
Yeah.
And it was like including dogs, very important. And so I was just, I'm very impressed with that. You know, I've been down there numerous times and waving to you often, you and your unnamed wife. Hi, Molly. Anyways, and so we've noticed that the participation just been phenomenal. So a good news story all the way around. And so thank you so much for all of your, and the AOA anyways, for all of your donations of volunteer time to making sure that this is done in the right way and getting past that learning curve. Anyways,
Yeah.
it's helpful having you there pointing out what needs to be fixed. So thank you so much for that, Ralph, and everybody. Council, comments or questions to Ralph at this time? Councilor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank you for making such a wonderful presentation to help us make a decision for the future, because it is the future, because it's not going away. We want more and more people to use this. And thank you very much. It's very thorough.
Good.
Give us an idea, like the mayor said, to the budget and everything. So this is like all around a good news story.
It really
Terrific.
is.
We don't always get those, you know. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. Ralph, AOA, team members, it was a pleasure working with you on this project, and it's great to see it over the finish line. And it's definitely the names that you mentioned. Thank you for mentioning my name, but definitely the other members of council who supported this idea. Just to kind of give you a little update that we did approve as council previous, when we did our budget meeting last week. We have, I think it was $14,000 in the business plan that we've approved for this. It's close to that. So my question is, it's more a question to the staff, but I'll ask you first, I guess. But this usage was only for what, 3 months that you have the statistics from? And likely, I think we plan on using from May, June, July, so more than about 5 months, I think ideally would be more. I think the coming year would be a much more better learning that we can put to this experiment, if I may. But definitely I see a lot of usage in the community. What's your take like when we see more time that this is being used? Do you anticipate perhaps more staff time, which is obvious, but also the costs, I guess, with it?
Well, in this table that I put up here, I estimated it for the period to be May 1st to September 30th. So
Yeah.
that's 5 months.
Yeah.
We only had not even 2 months. We had middle of July, it was installed, and it came out middle of September for the boardwalk replacement project. So we had 2 month experience. Certainly this was the peak period. July, August was tremendous with the number of people down on the beach and using it. So that was good to see what kind of traffic you can get up to, and that August weekend was indicative of what can happen. But I'd been down there on a weekday morning, and there would be like, we just do a quick count during 15 minutes, and it'd be 70, 80 people have used it going up and down. So it's, I even said to my wife that Parksville should maybe consider buying an extra little mat section that says, "Welcome to our beach." It really is a welcome mat to the beach. So it's getting high traffic. To my mind, the construction of the mat was impressive on how it grips into the surface. It does not slide around. Everybody that was using it remarks it is very friendly for bare feet, little kids. So that was good feedback. So I would say it's not going to be an issue too much because it's getting used 5 months. But watching the weather as we did, that seems to be the viable period. Let's put it that way, May to September. And I don't know if you've heard any complaints. Why isn't the mat still out there? But we haven't heard any complaints. So
Thank you.
I think it's reasonable to do it during the
Thank-
summer season.
If you can speak a little bit about the beach chairs as well. So
Yeah.
I know perhaps you have an agreement with the beach club.
Yeah.
With the chairs, and would that agreement be again followed next year? And also, if you can add to that, what will be the role of AOA in this project going forward, if you'll be involved in any way?
Okay, so with the beach chairs, that's at this point in time has nothing to do with the city of Parksville. We have a donation agreement in place with the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association. So they are the formal owners of the chairs. And Beach Club Resort acts as the operator, the loan out point for the chairs. So we got some statistics from them. They were used 13 times in the brief period that they were available. So maybe every 2 or 3 days, somebody was using a chair during that period. We only deployed one of the 2 chairs. We never needed a second chair, but we would like to get more usage, so we have to be more active in promoting it and get the word out that it's there. I think that's important. Other than that, AOA doesn't see a further role other than in the promotion of the availability of these chairs, letting people know far and wide. One other aspect would be taking our experiences that we learned here and going to other jurisdictions or municipalities, such as Qualicum Beach, whether they would be willing to try it again on their beach, knowing what we know now from Parksville.
Thank you, Ralph. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through to our delegation. Thank you very much, Ralph. A lovely story, a real wonderful wonderful event that took place there earlier this year in July, and great to see that it's working well and so on. And one of my questions was going to be about the beach chairs, so I appreciate that Councillor Gore asked that question, because I was curious to know how often they were used, and I imagine that over time, once people do see them, that the word will spread that they are available. So great to hear that you've got that relationship sorted out with the Tourism Association. So that's good too. I was curious about the expected longevity of the Mobi-Mats. Maybe it depends on the setting to some degree, but do you have an idea as to how long they are expected to last before they need to be replaced?
Unfortunately, I don't know. I can try to find out what experiences are, but there's a wide variety of settings, be it on lakes or rivers or on the ocean. I think the best person to speak to and would be the Nanaimo, because they have 4 of them out, and I think they're into their 3rd or 4th year of deploying them on Departure Bay Beach. So that might be the best indicator of the lifespan, if they've had to replace any sections or not.
Any other questions, Council? Councillor Wood, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ralph, for all your work on this one. I missed the opening here because I was in Ontario visiting my mom, but the park that is near my mom is on a lake, and they have a Mobi-Mat. I don't think they take as good care of kind of the daily maintenance as we were of this one. And from what I saw, it probably makes quite a bit of difference as to how often it's used. And so I just wanted to mention that. Obviously, you want it used and you want it to look great and work great. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, I can't stress how critical this is, because a little bit of seaweed is no big deal, right? Some people could kick it off themselves, but once you start getting these bulges or a log, floats up to it, a kind of thing, or there's a big gap, then people can slip. And I saw someone slip, and it has to be attended to. The good news is it really only has to be done once a day. I generally went down a couple hours after high tide had receded, and then you're good for the day. So it's not something that has to be repeated every 3 or 4 hours or anything like that. So the problem is that window shifts every day. So it has to be scheduled accordingly, that at some point somebody goes down to take a look at it.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Gruntz, yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon. Through to our delegation, Ralph, thank you again so much. AOA, great work. Very much appreciate it. Such a great win for our community. I was wondering if maybe go back to the next slide. There you go. I just wanted to make sure I get the number of trips recorded down. I want to write that down. And my somewhat facetious question is, are you going to be writing a manual on how to get good work done in the community? Because I think this is a true demonstration of the amount of collaboration and hard work that needs to happen on the part of members in the community that have a passion for something that they want to see happen. So I very much appreciate that you did this work and got so many people on board for this vision that the AOA had.
Thank you.
And I'll just conclude it. Ralph, thank you so much for everything you've done here. And I have to say that I appreciated your check mark, regarding the accessibility on the beach. That was very critical. That was on our list of what needed to be done. With that in mind, recognizing that many people throughout the world that are planning their trips will check accessibility options at the locations that they're hoping to visit. And you had, here's your numbers here up on the slide suggesting how popular it was just after being installed. I know a number of people now that will be planning their vacations for next year, and they're planning them now. If they're prudently doing their vacation as they're sitting in the rain and the cold, it's a good time to plan on going to Parksville. Now this is going to be listed. I know it's on the Rick Hansen Foundation site and so forth, and I know that there are various other sites that identify clearly that accessibility options for that site. So we're even going to be busier next year is what I'm suggesting. That's where I'm implying here. But we jumped an enormous hurdle. And that hurdle was the fact is we knew we wanted to make our beach accessible, but we didn't know how to do it effectively because we have a very unique situation, as you described, the tides. As Councillor Wood pointed out, back in Ontario, it was at a lake surface, a completely different environment than what we have here at Parksville, with the 2 tides a day and everything on the West Coast beach. All sorts of things come floating up on that tide. So that was one of the hurdles. We didn't know if it would work. We've overcome that hurdle. The Mobi-Mats work. So now we have to do everything in our power to make sure that they continue to work well and provide safe access to the beach. And if that means allowing in our budget, that whatever it takes, the financial backup to make that happen, then that's what we as council have to study. And you've given us good numbers that we can base it around generously to make sure that they're maintained properly. So that's going to be very important to get those mats to last as long as we can in a safe manner before they need to be replaced, because we're going to have a lot of visitors, I can guarantee it. So good information today, really good information, not just a good news story, but a good moving forward story as well. So that check mark is one part, but we have to continue to maintain that check mark as long as we have these Mobi-Mats and other accessible features in our community park. So good information. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great. With Ralph before he leaves. If I can, you're okay, Ralph, you can sit down. Councillor Gord just said we're on the subject of Mobi-Mat, and just something came up while we were talking about it that he'd want to direct to staff, if we could. Go ahead, Councillor Gord.
Thank you, Mayor. So if staff could kind of give me an idea of a situation where, like Ralph showed some of the pictures of those big logs drifting after the tides and ending up on the Mobi-Mats, it becomes really unsafe, let's say, for public use. So what's the protocol for city staff to kind of coordinate off, saying it's no longer safe for use, to avoid any liability on city for such events? And does it fall on the community members to kind of call the city, hey, it looks like the mat is really unsafe to use? Or is it like a standard practice for the park staff to do a morning inspection? So I just want to make sure we as city don't become liable to any of these events when such a surface becomes really unsafe for public use. Thank you.
CAO Kaler, if you can just give a kind of a brief overview of the level of service that for such an event.
Yes, thank you, through the mayor. So we have essentially a combination of different things. So when we basically have policy that is mostly complaints driven, unless there's a specific service level established. So for some things like sidewalk maintenance, we have a little bit more detail, but generally speaking, we address liability through due diligence. So we as a city can establish what our capacity is to do inspections on things like playground equipment, public surfaces, all those kinds of things. And so what we would have to do is, if we were notified of something that was definitely dangerous, we either, as you mentioned, address it right away, or we can temporarily close something like a trail, or, if something's damaged or vandalized. I think we have a slide that will come to council during your decision making on the service level for this particular item. And I think we're close to the same numbers, I would say, as what was just presented, but with an extended from May to September, I think we would be closer. We are a little bit lower than what was presented today, but I think looking at the May to September, we'd probably be very close to that number. And what I mentioned before is we would need the understanding of council and the community that staff wouldn't be doing something else when they're attending to those items. So at the beginning, we were a little bit nervous because things needed a lot of work for the first couple of weeks. But I think with the adjusting that staff did and staff who are in the park anyway, kind of having eyes on the situation there, we were able to address most of it. And I think it'll be, again, just monitoring over the next little while, the condition of the mat. We may get more storms earlier in the shoulder, earlier and later. We also took the mat out a little bit sooner this year because we were doing the boardwalk upgrades. So I think what we'll be asking council for is a decision on the service level, and then we will just have to adjust as we learn more about this particular item. We do have signage on the area that would address really kind of use at your own risk, which, is one of the things that MIA, our insurance folks, tell us to do. And people would have to, be cautious. Like if it's just been a storm and the mat's all twisted, then maybe, make a decision about whether you can use it safely. So we've talked about all of those things. When we get the direction from council, we will probably need to talk with you about, do we need to upgrade policy, or do we need, we also need direction on whether we accept it as the city's, which then puts it under our general liability. So there's a few things we can chat about when we get to that item on the budget.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, CAO Kaler. Okay, moving along, council for reports. We have the first report is from Mayor Doug O'Brien regarding the 2025 council appointees to review and renew the council appointments to committees, boards, and liaison positions. You all saw the background information. Do I have a mover second for the recommendations? Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Grenz. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That carries unanimous. Thank you, council. Now, the next report is by the Director of Community Planning and Building, the follow-up report regarding the development variance permit application at 446 Harnish Avenue to consider issuance of a development variance permit. Do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Beal, seconded by Councillor Wood. Any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. I had the opportunity to go and speak with the affected property adjacent to the applicant here. And we as council have also received correspondence from them. And same day, the individual decided to write me another email. So with your permission, I want to read some of his feelings about this variance application. The scenario we wish to address is akin to the good neighbor fence, named because of its ability to provide a boundary and privacy while allowing neighbors to interact and engage within a safe and respectful space, while also respecting the boundary of each other's properties. This scenario is the removal of that fence. All our neighbors have spent significant amounts of money and time cultivating a private backyard experience where we garden, recreate, and occasionally visit over our fences. This additional single-family dwelling will rob us all of that experience, not only during construction, but in the increased traffic, noise, and close proximity after completion. I have a few questions to our planning staff through you, Mayor, if I may. So with the Bill 44 and the ability for individuals to have up to 4 units, why should this not be designated as an accessory, and why is it a single family dwelling when it's only 400 square feet in size?
Through to the Director of Planning, Blaine, if you're available, or there, you are here, Mr. Russell. If you could address that question, if you would, sir.
Certainly two things. Also, before council makes its decision, I would ask also that an opportunity be provided for if there was any member of the public to also comment on this variance application as well. But with respect to Councillor Gore's question, we are required to allow as a result of Bill 44 to allow for 4 dwelling units on a property. There's a number of ways that those could be sliced or diced in how they're proposed. If the province had its wish, they would be a 4-plex, 4 individual houses. The provincial dream would be that they would not be restricted in any way possible. In the implementation of the city attempt to meet the requirements, we looked at what would be the natural evolution of the city's existing regulations. So the natural evolution would be that a carriage house would no longer be size restricted. And so it is now effectively a second dwelling, and that's what it is in the bylaw. And that is to assist with so the city's bylaw meets the requirements within each single family dwelling. You can have a suite. So that equals 4 units, 2 principal units and 2 secondary units. Alternatively, a property could be developed with a duplex, again, with 2 principal units within that duplex, each with a suite. And so the city's bylaw satisfies the provincial Bill 44 requirements and staff's opinion, and it has done so in a way that was as compatible as possible with the existing regulatory framework given the provincial direction.
Go ahead, Councillor Gore.
Yes, no, thank you, Mr. Russell. I really appreciate how we customized the requirements of the Bill 44 to meet the needs of our community. A follow-up question to yourself through the mayor is, we will likely see a lot more of this with Bill 44, the higher density. We will likely see some more complaints with people's privacy being affected. Do you think it's time for the bylaw on the fences heights be also addressed, since one fence is only allowed to be 4 feet, the other one can be up to 6 feet? Perhaps this is something the council could look at and allow the fence height to be increased. And second, could this applicant, let's say the council approves this, I don't know if you're allowed to, can we make them have the windows not face somebody's backyard, the neighboring property?
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Gore. So there's a couple questions in there. So the fact that the setbacks have been adjusted, again, fulfilling the, in moving towards the provincial Bill 44 requirements. So the front yard setbacks are reduced from 7.5 meters, I believe, to 4.5 meters. So that has actually increased the allowable fence height. So within the front yard, which is defined as the front setback area, fence height is restricted. But outside of that front yard setback, you're allowed to be 2 meters, which is roughly 6.5 feet. So now a fence can be 2 meters or 6.5 feet up to 4 meters from the front property line. So there has been an automatic adjustment just through the change in the setback definition. However, if council wishes to provide further direction on other changes to fence height, staff are more than happy to look at that as a part of our work program. And sorry, there was another question, if I may. So that's regulated by the BC Building Code. So if, for example, if you were to have a building 1 meter from the property line, you wouldn't be able to have any windows in it whatsoever. There's fire separation requirements that regulate how many window openings you can have, depending on the position of the building to its property line. And I believe around 1.2 meters is kind of, if it's more than 1.2 meters, then you can have a window. If it's less than 1.2 meters, you can't.
Okay. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to make a few comments about this this report and the request here. I also read the correspondence that we got from the neighbor, and I can appreciate the worries and the concerns regarding noise, particularly if you happen to have your bedroom, on that side of the house. I think it's worth noting, though, that with this variance request, it's a variance of approximately 16 inches. And with this variance, I noted that there can't be a change in height. So for instance, this will be a single story dwelling, and it can't just go to 2 stories. So in fact, the impact on the neighbor's backyard and privacy should be minimized. If this building was 16 inches over, then in fact, it would be open to the possibility of them constructing a 2-story building. So there's a little bit of, let's say, a little bit of a benefit there in that there is a request for a variance. I also noted that I can appreciate the concern, would there be windows or not? And hopefully they can have some good neighbor agreements that, hopefully there will be some consideration for that. And also the fact that the fence can be the height that it will be. Again, with a single-story building, hopefully there would not be too much of an impact. Also, I think it's worth noting that I understand that one can request, if it came to that, one can request a variance with fence height for some specific reasons. And so rather than having a blanket change in fence height variation, one can bring that forward. And the cost for that is actually quite minimal. I think it may be as low as $200. It's really not like other variance requests. So all of those things I think are to the plus for this. And yeah, it seems like it would be, I'm going to support this. I will say that. But I do want to finish also by noting that in the correspondence that we received, there was some mention to people living for a period of time in an RV in the driveway there. Now, that is not something that is permitted within the city. And I can appreciate how annoying that could be, because those doors for RVs, when they're open and closed, that slam, slam, slam is really not very pleasant to have right next door. So if somebody experiences that, they can contact the city bylaw or talk to the neighbors or whatever they need to do, so that hopefully that won't be impacting them. I noticed that on the map that the garage in question that is planned to be developed into dwelling is a little farther back. Hopefully the traffic noise won't be too bad, but the house itself will be farther back. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you. And I'll go to you, Councilor Martin, in a second. I'm just going to ask first if there's any questions from the audience or online at this point regarding this particular variance application. Nobody online? Thank you. Councilor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had my own experience in Victoria. I built a house and the houses were closer together, you could see the other person. And with the design of the home, we had a bathroom on the side wall that would be facing the neighbor. No windows that you could see, but we had a window that you could open because it was a bathroom. But there was that kind of glass in it. You couldn't see out the glass, so you could not see the neighbor's house. And I think those kinds of concerns are legitimate. And so that's what my own experience was. It was a bylaw in Victoria. And so with this, to be able to look into someone's backyard from your house, how could we do that, right? And so it was the same thing in our house in Victoria. So I thought I'd pass that on with my own experience, with building a new home. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of comments and maybe a question to our Director of Community Planning and Building. As always, it's nice to chat with your neighbors and be a good neighbor and have conversations, if renters are being loud, or, if there's a motorhome or a trailer in your driveway that's, making things a pain for your neighbor. Make sure those conversations happen and be good neighbors. I think that can avoid a lot of problems. To Councillor Beale's point, I believe a second story is possible without a variance as it is. I'm going to have a couple of questions here, so we'll stop with that one.
Okay. Mayor, through to Councillor Wood. So a second story would be possible subject to the standard setbacks of the zone. So if someone was to build a second story, it would have to meet the 1.6 meter setback. It doesn't, the way the permit's being written is such that it's for the existing building only. It doesn't apply to any additions. So any additions, whether vertical or to the back or to the front, would have to meet the standard setback requirements.
Sure, thank you. So without a variance, a second story could be built. With this variance, it has to stay at 1 story, and it sounds like the fence could be increased to 6.5 feet for the kind of the rear parts of the property, if I'm following you correctly.
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Wood, the bylaw allows for 2 meters or 6.5 feet fences, yes.
Thank you. And if I may, just to confirm what I was listening to earlier, with the setback, the building is so close to the fence that no windows are probably permitted on that?
Mayor, through to Councillor Wood, I believe that's the case. I'm not the city's building code expert. That would be my chief building inspector, but I believe 1.2 meters is the distance where 1.2 or closer windows are almost impossible, but it would be very limited.
Sure. And Mayor, one more, if I may, please.
Absolutely, follow up.
This is my last one, I swear.
Get that out.
Mr. Russell, am I correct in remembering that for Bill 44, the province was asking for 0 meter setbacks?
If I may, Mayor, through to council, I actually brought up my report earlier today in preparation. So it was 1.2 meters was actually what the province was recommending for the side yard setbacks, which is what is proposed here.
Okay, thank you.
That's good. Councillor Bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I'd just like to make a comment, taking advantage of the fact that our fire chief is here. And although people hesitate to generally speaking, we want to have that privacy in our backyard, but there can actually be an advantage at times to have windows that look towards our neighbors. I experienced that when I was living in Vancouver many years ago, and the window in our kitchen looked across to the house opposite, where I saw a fire break out in their kitchen. And so I was able to run out the door, get over to their house. They were still not aware that the fire had broken out. And so meanwhile, things were burning on the stove, the flames were going up. So I was able to get in there and alert them to the fact that there was in fact a fire in their place, and together we put it out. So now and again, a window when you've got good neighbors is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Beal. Okay, any further comments? There's no comments from the audience. I'm going to ask, we have a mover and a seconder already for this. Do we have all those in favor? It carries unanimous. Thank you, Council. The next report on the agenda is from the Director of Finance regarding the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. Presentation by Ms. Holmes regarding the financial plan proposals for improved service levels and council initiatives. Welcome, Ms. Holmes. Nice to see you again.
Good afternoon. Just a standard item on the agenda right now.
Yeah. You're getting frequent flyer points.
Exactly. So this is going to continue the conversation that we started at the Committee of the Whole meeting last Wednesday, which was to start looking at some items that have been brought forward by council as well as staff for enhanced or changes to service levels. So I'll just move ahead here. Here we are, November the 4th, council decision items. So as we talked about last week, if there's items on here that you know you absolutely don't want to proceed, please indicate that and they won't be brought forward in terms of the cumulative analysis on November 18th. If there are items where there's choices for funding or other things, we would appreciate your direction on that as to which one would be your preference, assuming those funds are available, and with respect to timing as well. these were the items that were considered by you to be brought forward last week. And those were the lacrosse box, the Mobi-Mat, the bus shelters, the labyrinth level of service, but pending a presentation that is coming to you on Wednesday, the Sutherland stairs and ravine restoration, and the park shed storage. So those are items we've already received direction on, and we'll bring those back to you with details. So looking forward at new items for your consideration and direction today. Before we get into these, in front of you is an analysis of different reserve balances that we chatted about last week that I wanted to get to you, just so that you know kind of where we're starting at with respect to the core financial plan in terms of balances, where we would be after that core financial plan. So what we'll bring at the cumulative analysis is kind of these would be our starting points, and where we've suggested different funding options from these reserves, we would show you what the various impacts are, that so we can understand various choices, including if one type of funding is overspent and we need to find a different one. So again, these aren't audited balances. They're reflecting transactions estimated for 2024 as well as what's in the core financial plan. So we can make reference to that as we go here, or if you've got questions, I'd be happy to take those as well. So the first item for council direction is with respect to the fire hall upgrade. And as you know, in the core financial plan and in the last number of years of financial plans, probably 10 years, this is an item that's been rolling forward in the time frame. And currently there's about $5 million in the financial plan to reflect that. However, during the year, there was $200,000 allocated to doing some initial order of magnitude estimates, as well as getting some alternatives for what that upgrade might look like. That work was done, and the consultant essentially suggested three main alternatives with some essentially order of magnitude estimates. These aren't detailed design estimates, but rough estimates. The first alternative being a renovation to address the kind of critical components that were needed in terms of current service levels and looking forward at planned service levels. And the renovation estimate is $11 million. The second alternative was to essentially build a brand new hall in the same location. What you may recall is that council in 2023 purchased two properties adjacent to the fire hall that was part of this long-term vision related to the fire hall upgrade. So same location, new hall, $29 million. And alternative number three is really what we might call a do nothing type alternative. And that means that if council decided it didn't want to go ahead with one or two, there's still some items that need to be addressed as part of overall service levels, occupational health and safety, career staff, volunteer staff. And so the range of addressing those kind of items ranges from about 2 million to 10 million, depending on kind of what pieces of it. And that alternative might involve kind of some ATCO trailer type storage and or office building and or other facilities adjacent to the fire hall. However, they wouldn't necessarily be considered temporary, and so there needs to be certain infrastructure works done to the site to accommodate that. So although we may think of it as temporary, it's not really temporary, and there are things that are required. And fire staff has checked in with our building department, has all the kind of regulations around that. So again, with that one, there can be a capital component or an operating component, which may then limit or provide funding opportunities depending on which of those alternatives we went with. So those were the three main alternatives that were presented as a result of the works done in this year in terms of looking into this upgrade. The recommendation from staff is the alternative number one, the renovation. And what I will point out is that this is one, a critical service that is provided by the city. And it is something that we have some funding alternatives for. What I've presented here and I'll walk through with you is an alternative that wouldn't actually require an increase in property taxes, but that we could use some of the reserves that are provided for in the sheet here, as well as unrestricted surplus. And so currently we've got about $3 million approved in last year's financial plan, 2.25 million from gas tax and $750,000 from Growing Communities Fund. That's what was already in the financial plan. In terms of coming up to the $11 million, that is the estimated cost, what I've illustrated here is that typically the RDN is about 30% of capital costs through the service agreement that we have with the RDN for the fire department to provide fire services to RDN electoral areas adjacent to Parksville. Their share would be about $3.3 million. So essentially, the city needs to come up with $7.7 million. The incremental amounts that I would suggest could be used is additional Growing Communities Fund and or gas tax. So a combination of those two or one or the other of 1.5 million. A reallocation of unrestricted surplus, which if you recall, we did with policing last year in terms of surpluses that had been from their contract, we reallocated from unrestricted to their specific protective services reserve. There were developer contributions to the fire department in the last 13 years since the last fire hall renovation happened of about $650,000. So I would suggest that that's something that we could reclassify towards this project, as well as in that same time frame, there were surpluses within the department operating budgets of about $1.3 million. And then the last part of that would be, we've had a lot of discussions around asset management. One of the things that hasn't been put aside in our reserves is related to facilities, including the fire department. So my suggestion might be to look at this 0.5% of property tax contributions that have been made over the last 4 years. If those could be allocated to the fire hall, that would be about $1.2 million. Those amounts would provide the additional amounts to get to 7.7. Again, this assumes that that $11 million estimate is reasonable, and we would have to go to the next stage of a detailed design to really understand if that is. But this is a recommendation that has a little bit of flexibility in it, but is something that could provide the funding for this alternative without requiring a property tax increase. Of course, other funding alternatives I have listed there would include debt, but that requires a public approval process and would require some timing and ultimately a property tax increase to repay it. There could be some internal borrowing. There would be DCCs available under the new DCC bylaw, so that might be something to plan for the next round of fire hall or new or upgrade. Because that's unlikely to collect enough in the short term to help fund this project. I welcome your questions on that. What I would suggest, though, is that tied up with this whole project being a part of our long-term financial plan was also the planned service levels that somewhat depend on that facility reflecting that level of service. So that reflects both the growth of the community, more career staff that have been factored into the long-term plan, including the current plan has 2 new FRSTs in 2027. So the building needs to be able to accommodate that new career staffing, including that whole shift to shift work, 12 hours, dorm facilities, things like that. So this capital project is tied very closely and interwoven with the service levels that are currently reflected in the 5-year financial plan. So depending on council's direction on this, there may be changes then required to the operating activities as well, just because they're reflective of what has been planned over the long term and in that service level and that level of career staffing, which, as we know, the volunteer hours have been down and all that goes with that. So it's a somewhat complex and interwoven analysis in terms of the capital asset providing the services, and then that service level needing to mesh with what the community looks like now and the changes that have happened with that. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Happy to take questions on that. I think that's all my notes on that.
Thank you, Jetta. And just while it's fresh in my head, yes, Councillor Wood, you'll be first after me. Just well, you described it. I just want to, while it's fresh in our minds, the highlighted amount in yellow up on the screens anyways is what I'm referring to. The RDN share suggesting that it would be repaid through the RDN service agreement for 3.3 million. And I understand this service agreement in place and so forth, but that would be paid over a 20-year period, would it not?
That's the current agreement does say that.
So we're suggesting that 3.3 million will be coming in, but it will be coming in over 20 years.
Right. And essentially what we would do it is fund that share up front out of our own surplus funds, and it would be repaid by the RDN. We haven't had a conversation with the RDN about this because it hasn't been presented as part of our financial plan. We would certainly follow up with them because it's possible they may have reserves that they've been putting towards this. They may have a grant that would be appropriate. So we would certainly have that conversation with them, whether or not they would want to handle that differently. The Qualicum Beach Fire Hall, that they also have a fire service agreement, was funded through an FCM Green Fund because they had a lot of different green items involved in the hall. It was a brand new hall that was eligible for that grant. So they didn't have the same scenario in that it was essentially 100% grant funded. So I couldn't go to them to see, okay, how did that get handled? But we would certainly want to have a conversation with the RDN as to whether they wanted to do that differently. But the current agreement would reflect a 20-year repayment.
Yeah, and that's leading to, that's the reason for my question, Jed, is because like, as you say, we're then actually funding from the surplus reserve fund. You know, we know that we're going to get paid back, you know, like in 20, but I don't feel that that's actually a transparent, method of doing it. We're counting on that, but that's going to be coming in regardless. And when the contractor's finished doing the renovation on the hall, he's going to want to get paid. We're going to have to pay him now. We can't say, can you take the following payments, 3.3 million over the next 20 years, because that's when we're going to get it. So, we're going to have to fund that out of our reserve surplus. So my point is that reserve surplus is going to drop by 3.3 million, now, right away, as well as the other ones you have right here. So I'll get my head around this. In the meantime, I'll give the microphone to Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. For myself, the $29 million alternative 2 seems a bit expensive. I wish we had a bunch of money to do that. Alternative 3 to myself, to me, doesn't seem like that is a good way to approach it. I'm leaning towards alternative 1 myself. If this went ahead with council approval, I'm terrified after hearing, the North Shore wastewater treatment plant is the worst case scenario. But as we get more accurate estimates, class C, B, A, whatever we end up doing, how will we adapt this, this funding? Ideally, the estimates come back lower. That's my rose-colored glasses. And then, worst case scenario, what if that bottom number was 15 or 18? Do we have any kind of plan in case those estimates start to creep up if council were to approve this alternative number 1? Thank you.
Through the mayor, if I may. So I guess a couple of responses to that. One is we had 200,000 initially allocated by council from the land sale reserve to kind of do the design and estimating. So we would certainly go ahead with if council were to support this alternative, getting a detailed design and some finer costing and bring that back for further consideration, especially if we're looking at something higher. And I'm with you. I hope it's lower. We are continuing to look for grants. We would be back to the drawing board, I guess, a little bit in terms of council. As always, when we have something come in over budget and you've had other tenders and such come back to you when we are faced with a funding decision, we would need to revisit the alternatives for funding and whether council still wanted to move ahead with that. So there would be an opportunity if the tender or design estimates came in significantly different from that. And then there is a regional component to the gas tax funding that will be coming on stream sometime within this next 6 months, and they don't know when. I think to some degree it depends on where different government elections happen. And so I think it's possible that we would be eligible based on what those regional funds have been granted to in the past, i.e. regional type fire services, that we would have some chance of applying for that grant funding. However, I don't know what the date is. I have called UBCM. They don't have a release date on that yet. So I think at each stage of this, you can revisit the funding. And like I say, we are always have our eyes open for new grants and try to apply where we might to projects that are currently in stream.
Follow up, go ahead.
Just a comment that I appreciate whatever time it took for staff to kind of compile the different sources into what we're looking at today. Thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to our Director of Finance, as always, for the diligent work. Is there anything we need to consider as regards our upcoming obligations around RCMP that at all relate to this capital investment work thinking? Speaking of interwoven.
Right. If I may, through the mayor, I think that over, say, the last 5 years, we have had discussions about, does it make sense to find a piece of property that could have both a fire hall and a RCMP station, for example, like looking for synergies there where it might make sense. And so as much as we've had some conversations around that, the early indications are it doesn't really make sense given some of the real needs location wise of RCMP are a little bit different than what is best for a fire hall in terms of accessibility and response times and things like that. In addition to that, the RCMP isn't quite there on a new detachment, which is good news for us in that we're not having to look for the funding related to that because we understand that the next detachment will be on the municipalities and not being provided at the federal or provincial level. And that is also a complex funding one, the RCMP, because we have provincial, regional, and municipal, 2 municipalities that all have services coming out of that. So that's a very long way of saying we've talked about it. It doesn't appear that there's an efficiency or a synergy there to be had, at least on today's knowledge.
Follow up, go ahead.
If I may follow up, Mayor, on the word synergy. I assume then also other potential synergies have been explored as well around other priorities for the city that may find some overlap.
Yeah, thank you. Through the mayor. One of the other synergies that has been considered and done by other fire departments in the province is a combination with, say, lower cost housing or even shelter type stuff. And there's been a number of fire halls that have tied in a social services element to them. Again, what tends to happen with those is the cost just goes through the roof. Or you have this incremental cost that is then shared with a not-for-profit social housing organization or something. So again, we've had conversations around some of the interesting projects that we see around the province that do that. And there are, there would likely need to be more land involved in order to be able to do that. So longer term, is there something there? Perhaps, but I think in the short term, those dollar amounts would be even higher to try and incorporate something else. So I think staff is bringing something forward that in terms of trying to meet the needs of the community for, I think that the fire chief has says this is likely kind of 2 decades out, and as well as finding creative funding solutions for that. And then maybe those other synergies are considered in the next round. The other piece I would say on this is, and this is my own plug for asset management, is when we're looking long-term at these facilities or infrastructure or whatever it might be, the sooner we start kind of financially planning for that, the more choices then that council has at the table, right? So you have reserves, but then there might be a grant that's available that you don't have to use your reserves right away, or you don't have to use property taxes to fund it and have a big jump or spike in your property taxes in the year. So it's complicated for sure, but I think anytime you add another piece to it, it adds complexity to the quotes and the land required and things like that. So certainly open to what that might be, but we've had lots of different conversations around what might be the best here. And certainly council was supportive of those 2 extra lots, which is kind of critical to now this piece and that kind of enlargement, which would be part of the renovation, is that additional apparatus bays that we currently have one piece of apparatus that is essentially out in the weather. It has a kind of light cover to it, but this would allow for new bays that would allow for new space for apparatus, as well as exercise and workout area and stuff like that. So I think having those lots in place was certainly part of that asset management piece in looking at the long-term needs of the fire hall. So those have been in the plan for probably a couple of decades in terms of looking out as to where the growth might be.
Thank you.
Maybe I can just make one quick
Oh,
comment. there. Yeah.
sorry, yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead,
thank you.
Councilor Grants.
I maybe just underline then that perhaps the clear remaining synergy would be around something like what Qualcomm Beach Fire Department did, where there may be some grant that connects with some other priority of another level of government, perhaps.
Yes. and
If I
it's-
may.
It was a green grant that they got, wasn't it not, as I recall, almost lead standard, I think.
It was, and I think ironically, there's been, because it needed to have all of those green elements, it's been a more complicated build and more expensive operationally, which is part of that whole life cycle piece, right? And so I think sometimes we think, oh, that sounds really good, but the light bulbs cost more to replace and this costs more to maintain and things like that than if you just do a kind of straight up structure. So I think it's all good, and it's great that they didn't have to lay out that kind of cash, but I think there's been implications to that as well. So yeah,
Just
it's a
one
beautiful
second, I just have
facility,
a
no doubt.
question. That's up to, I'll get to you next. Yeah, and I remember that going through, and it was, yeah, you got the grant, however, it was a however.
Yeah.
That came up after. Just a quick comment. I appreciate the staff recommendation on the alternative, but you know me, I'm always quite frank. I'm not comfortable with these numbers. I'm not comfortable with the numbers of 11 million. And only for the fact that, and yes, I agree that it should be the renovation we go through. But as the chief has mentioned, you know, that we're looking at a 20-year plan, a 20-year build out to the movement to, you know, more full-time personnel going to be there and accommodation overnight and so forth. And it's a big renovation, and I don't think 11 million comes close, recognizing the fact that this is our fire station, that it builds to a whole different level of building code, seismic and everything, you know, in the event of a major catastrophe, this is the last building that should fall down. You know, and that's what we need is this has to be in place. So I'm not comfortable with that, just knowing what we've had for other commercial public buildings that I know that's going on in the rest of the province. I think it would be far higher than that. And then I have this one little voice in the back of my head that keeps on saying, on the last renovation we did on the fire hall, it was outdated and too small the day it was completed. So that was, and I get that, and that was a blunder. I'll be quite frank here, it was a blunder because they didn't take into the considerations of everything that they should have considered. And in this particular case, if we're actually doing a 20-year build out, there's a plan here that there's much more things like I saw on the preliminary idea for the renovation. To me, it was underwhelming. It like, yeah, a full build would be really nice, but then we have the complications of, you know, old hall, new hall, you know, while you're building a new one, and that had its complexities itself. So I really feel that renovate is the right move in this particular case, but I think that this is under renovating it. We need more than this. This renovation should cost way more than this. To do it properly, to get a proper build out, I believe that we have to do it right. We have to have something that we're going to be proud of, that our personnel are going to be proud to work out of, and it's going to be health and safety related as well as providing, you know, better longevity for our equipment that's not adequately covered and so forth. My own personal choice, and I'm a little concerned, you know, like moving out, we have 2 years left, folks, here in our term. We have 2 years, and I'm concerned about committing funds, you know, like the gas fund, Canada Community Fund. It would just go to fire hall. We'd take that amount. We know we're getting, it was just going to plunge into that. And I get that. My personal preference is we get a more thorough set of drawings that'll take us to is a class C, I believe a class C estimate, to take it to a class C estimate. But I think it should be a much better product for this type of thing that's going to reflect the true cost. And quite frankly, I feel that we should, it's going to take enough time to get that done. And I think actually we should go to a borrowing referendum at the next election in 2 years. It's going to take that long to get all this done anyways. And I feel that that's the best way to do it, because it's going to be far more than this, folks. I can tell you right now, I see where the building costs are going, and this is, you know, I could barely build 3 houses with this amount. So all that I'm saying, I'm not comfortable with these numbers. I really am. So give me some comfort on getting a really good renovation on it, but I want a class C estimate on it, that's what it's going to come in at, because I think everything that's going on right now, it's way higher than that. Just my personal feelings. I'm not comfortable with the numbers.
If I may, just a
go ahead.
couple of comments on that. So my understanding, and certainly these estimates were provided by a very reputable consulting firm. So I think they have a lot of experience in costing these types of items, but certainly the renovation would deal with building code seismic issues. So I don't think there's any concern with doing a renovation of this magnitude. All of that needs to be factored in. The other thing I would caution you is the longer we leave it, the cost escalation just goes up every year. So there's a solution there with some possible funding. We can fine tune it with the detailed drawings, but what we know and what we're seeing in our neighboring municipalities is the cost escalation is unheard of. And there's not really a kind of stop on that in the horizon. So yes, what you're saying, going to referendum, all of that, it will cost more likely for exactly the same thing. So that would be my only caution. I don't see on the horizon costs coming down at all.
No, I never see costs coming down.
Yeah.
And that's the same with anything. You know, the longer we take to draw up a set of plans, the more it's going to cost. And that's I get that. But the other problem that I have is the fact that this was not identified as on our strategic plan. On our strategic plan, when this council developed our plan, it wasn't the fire hall. What we did strategically was we actually approved the purchase of the 2 lots at about $1 million each, knowing that we're going to need this. And so that was a good thing that we did anyways. And also in all the equipment and apparatus, we have no hesitation in replacing anything that needs to be done. And that was a part of it, but this wasn't part of our strategic plan. All that I'm suggesting is that there are other items that are on the strategic plan, like the water fund, the comprehensive water fund, that I know when we get a report back from that, and I know it's at least a year out, you know, before we get into, you know, number crunching to what recommendations are, I know that's going to come with big price tags. And that is on our strategic plan. So the thing is that if we're going to put some of the recommendations in for this plan that this council has approved for the water, it's going to come with a price tag on that as well. And I feel that it's incumbent on us to actually get that done, as we said we're going to. And I feel that this is kind of jumping in And I think by trying to get in at this time is not going to good as a good product. And I think it's going to give us a whole bunch of surprises. So that's where I'm at right now. Sorry. Councilor Beal, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Jetta. Well, I was going to say something quite different, but I was a couple of things. One, I just really appreciate that the work that's gone into looking at how this might be funded. Again, assuming that this estimate is close to what it would be. And will this slide be available somehow or?
For the public?
Yes, and also just, okay,
Yeah.
so if this information can come to us, that would be great. I'd like to access
Yeah.
it. But I also just want to add that although these figures don't jump, they don't scream affordable to me, the way you've laid it out, it does seem attainable. And I really appreciate that because, yeah, it really, really helps. And if it is possible to look at this, and if in fact it does go ahead according to this plan, to have that very minimal amount of property taxes going towards it, reads very, very well. But I do appreciate what our mayor is saying and that there are other priorities as well that one has. And of course, you have to balance all of that. But attainable is what it looks like right now. And I thank you for that.
Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for all your efforts at trying to put it across to us what we're dealing with. Was the $200,000 that we designated for the estimates to come up with this? So that $200,000 helped give us the estimates that we have $11 million? Is that, what was that $200,000?
Right.
You already said.
Through the mayor, if I may,
Yeah.
there was $200,000 estimated to start the kind of review of needs and assessment of
Yeah.
kind of what the fire hall is now and what the long-term financial plan identifies in terms of staffing, et cetera. So trying to then provide a cost estimate for a facility that would meet that service level and those plans going out.
Mm.
Because if you recall, within the financial plan, there's additions of career staffing, just getting to a point where there will be 24-hour career staffing of a small number of staff, but that's been in the plan for some amount of time. So yes, the 200,000, I think only 60 of it has been spent. Like we didn't spend the whole 200,000, but that's what it was in place for, was to start the initial needs assessment, rough costs, and then it would go to design detail after that with a finer tune cost.
So what's happening now then? There's going to be more plans that will come forward. Do we have to make a decision today on which one that we would support or not support? Is that how it works? Or I'm just.
Through the mayor, why this kind of first round of cost estimates is coming to council is for a couple of reasons. One is the amount that's been in the 5-year financial plan, although increased over time, has nowhere near kind of contemplated the cost escalation that we've seen over the last few years. So it's just a much higher number, where other projects that we've had in the financial plan, you get to it, oh, we're actually not that far out. It required a minor. So one of the reasons is it's significantly different than what was in the financial plan. And then the second is that, yeah, we do need direction from council on this, kind of summarized on the next. This is like the most significant project in the financial plan dollar-wise, but also, as I mentioned, it's very interwoven with the level of service that is provided by the fire department and the plan to continue that level of service in a growing community. And so getting direction from council on this is important, because any of those options changes the other pieces of the financial plan, including the operating. And so we do need direction on this one with respect to alternatives, even if it is to go with, say, alternative number 1 to the next level of design detail and further refining those cost estimates so that we can continue down that road and leave the financial plan operating as it is for now, reflecting that that renovation would allow those operating service levels to be met. But if council isn't going to go down that road, then we're going to need to go back to the drawing board a little bit on the fire department operating budget, because there will be things in there that will need to change as a result of this, as well as look at the costs and bring council back more information about what the options are in the kind of do nothing alternative, i.e. there's still some things that will need to be done, and it's various amounts, and funding is different depending whether they're operating or capital changes. So this is an important one in that it has a number of different areas that it touches in the financial plan beyond the capital piece. There's lots of capital projects that we might be able to put off 1 or 2 years and it doesn't really change the operating numbers. This one is quite interwoven with those numbers, and there are some basic requirements that need to be met over the next couple of years, regardless of which option is chosen. And so we'll need to factor that in into this financial plan.
Right.
And so we will need council's
Okay,
direction.
another question then.
Go ahead.
Thank you,
Follow
Jeff.
up.
Yeah, is it then part of the 200,000 that can be used for the design? Yes, so we have the
Through the
funds
mayor,
already
yes.
sitting there for design.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. I share the mayor's thoughts as to that $11 million it feels like $11 these days. Jetta, what does the timeline look like for, say, the next Class C estimate? Is my first question. Then I'm going to add my second question, which, and maybe it's to the chief. If we get a number back from, say, if the next step is a Class C estimate, and if that number is X% higher than what we expect, what number would staff feel like the recommendation would change from the current one to maybe hit the brakes on it? I know that it'll come back to us for further spending, so there are steps along the process. But when is that Class C or whatever the next estimate is, and what do we feel that number would be too big to kind of, it would change that recommendation? Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, I'll perhaps try and answer that first. It's a good question, and there's been a number of projects in the province where it's like, okay, do we keep going? Do we step back from this? Because the cost escalations have been significant. So a couple of thoughts. One is, one thing that council could do, because this doesn't impact the property taxes, is you could essentially hold that funding combination, I would say, in abeyance and go ahead, given that 200,000 is already there for the further design details, and essentially approve in principle, hold that funding, i.e. don't allocate it elsewhere, get the detailed design and bring it back as part of the amended financial plan. So that gives a few months to pull that together, to do any further analysis. Maybe that grant finally comes on stream, I'm not sure. And bring that back to council. Hopefully it's within that realm. It may not be, and in which case we're back at the same place, not having changed the property tax decision on the financial plan. But the unrestricted surplus, of course, we could just leave there. The capital reserve, there's actually sufficient funds in the capital reserve to leave that, and I don't think hold up other decisions of council. It would be looking at the growing communities and gas tax, which again, my gut feel on it is there's enough there as well. So that would probably be my recommendation. If council is feeling like we need some more information, we need to have more surety around that $1 million estimate, is, like I say, just hold it there for the time being and bring it back as part of the amended.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not in favor at all of holding funding in advance. I'm not in favor of that at all, but that's okay. That's up for council's decision. Yes, further questions? Councillor Wood.
Just to follow up, sorry. Thank you, Mayor. Jetta, when do we think we might get that Class C, if that's the next one, estimate to look at?
If I may, I'm just going to refer to the fire chief in case he has a time frame on that. Do you have any idea?
Sure.
Time?
Thank you, through the mayor to the councillor. That has not been requested yet, so that is not in process at this time. We would need authorization to move forward with that. if that's the direction that council wants to give. I think we could get towards a Class B estimate. It would probably take several months to do that. There are some procurement issues around that, following our procurement policies and those sorts of things. So we would have to look at what process to use and then how to move forward. So we would have to report back on that in the short term.
So I would just add to that, I think that probably gives enough time before the amended financial plan, since that's April that we would typically start to meet on that.
So the question is, we had 200,000 allocated, we spent 60.
I think it's about 60, yes. yeah.
So the question is,
It's
can
under-
we, how far will $140,000 go towards getting a Class B estimate?
Sorry, we've spent 40 plus 60 is 100,000. So we have
Oh, 40
100,000.
plus
Yeah.
60. So you,
You don't think it's 100 total? 60 total. Okay.
just for the
Yeah.
the Collier's report.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was 60 or.
The only way to determine that is to go to request for proposals on getting that work done. That's the only way to determine the cost of that.
No, this is just an estimate before you get the work done. This is just like we just did.
That is a request for proposals on what the cost of the work would be to get done and the timeline for it. We would have to put out a request for proposals to obtain, because that estimate will be based on detailed design.
Yes.
We would have to have detailed design completed, which means there's a project management aspect to procuring architects and all those sorts of things, and then having them do that detailed design work, which includes all the electrical, all the utility design work in order to know exactly what the extent of the project is.
Right.
And then we would be able to come up with that number. So that's what we would be going out through our procurement processes to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I would add to that is all of our public procurement documents always have the proviso that they will only go ahead if there's sufficient funding. So of course, we always issue procurement in good faith that it will be awarded, but there is always that proviso that if it's over budget, then it may not be awarded at all. It says something like it won't necessarily go to the lowest bidder. It won't be awarded if there isn't sufficient funding. So something like that.
Well, just like with the Ravens on Pool expansion. There's no contractor involved in it, but they actually went, what do you intend to do with the expansion? What do you want to build and so forth? And we got a number that's the number. It's not going to a procurement. It's not going to contractors and so forth. It's like they know the project manager that, obviously Tom Osborne handled it anyways, and he came up with a number. But I don't think it was Class B. I think it was Class C. I'm almost want to back up and say it was a Class C estimate. It says based on the building, what you want, everything, and it has to be fairly extensively listed. Based on that, they do that, and then they do a plus 15 points on it, and then they say, and here's what you're coming in Class C. So whatever that takes, I would be receptive to looking at that, unless it costs $1 million just to get that done. But as it is now, I'm not happy.
Right. I think you have to go, the further along the road you go on it, the better your cost estimate's going to be, right? So if council's really wanting some more surety around it, I think the process that the fire chief has described is the way to get to that. And then you get someone who's really looking at the cost, and we probably have a whole lot more comfort around the amount. Yeah, then we would also have the design. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but no, it didn't have to go to design, like in the case of a Raven. Yeah, okay, because anyway, the Ravens on Pool just said, we're going to have the following features, in a type of thing. And then we have to do this to the existing building. And so that's what the project manager came to. They had not going to working drawings at all. They just got. Right, right. Councilor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, from what I'm hearing around the room, it sounds like would benefit from some additional information. And I'm wondering if, what is needed at this point in order to move forward in that. And do we need a motion here in order to do that?
Through the mayor. Yeah, I think we would want a motion on what council's direction is specifically, especially of a project of this magnitude, because like I say, it impacts a lot of different things. So if we have an indication by council as to the next steps, well, then the other things can wait while that gets investigated or further details provided to council. So I do think we do want a motion on this one. This isn't necessarily one that'll be part of the cumulative analysis for further direction later. I think the sooner we can receive an indication from council, the better on this.
Councilor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Do we have a rough idea how much a Class B estimate is going to cost us and where that funding is going to come from? Thank you.
Through the mayor. So the funding for it would come from what's remaining out of that land sale reserve allocation. Certainly we could, if council were to give direction today to do that, we could certainly find out in short order, I think, what that cost might be and whether that's sufficient. If that amount is not sufficient, then we'll be coming back at one of the next couple of financial plan meetings to say, okay, we're going to have to rejig that a little bit. I don't know that right now, but we have been reluctant to go too far down the road till we got more indication from council as to directions. So not wanting to incur any more costs than what we're required to get kind of this order of magnitude, which is what council approved in last year's financial plan. So yeah, depending on council's direction, we would kind of take next steps and report back as appropriate.
Thank
Councilor
you.
Wood.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to proceed to a Class B estimate so that mayor and council have more information to go forward. And hopefully we get that back before the amended budget in April. And that's just off the top of my head. And if there's any recommendations to the verbiage.
The only thing, make a recommendation to go to Class B, but as long as put a cap on the cost to get there.
Sure, and if we need a cap in the motion, but we don't know, I don't think we.
Like if it takes $1 million to get there, then I can't support that. Yes, go ahead, CAO Kaler.
Thank you. Perhaps if I may, through the mayor, make a suggestion that we be directed by council today to investigate the costs to obtain a Class B estimate. And if it's more than whatever's in the budget, we would report back to council.
Let's do that.
That works.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Councilor Bill.
I'd like to second that.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so that's fine. Okay. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Sorry, Councilor Martin, you had your hand up before and. Okay, so that's fine. Okay. Councilor Bill, go ahead. It's on the
Thank
table.
you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And if I understand correctly, if in fact the cost estimate for getting a Class B estimate is within our budget, then that in fact would just go ahead. That's my understanding. Good. Thank you.
Within which budget are you suggesting? And we spent how much on that?
I think it's 60.
Okay, we got a 60.
So I think we have
So that's
140
140.
remaining.
Okay, that's good. I just.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Okay, 140 left. That's so, okay, that's fine. Okay, any further discussion on that resolution? Is your hand up or are you just, oh, okay. Trying to stay warm. Okay, all those in favor? No, a hand. It can't be a nod. Thank you. That carries.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few more items that council had requested be brought to this meeting for further discussion. So I'll just walk through some of those and essentially pass it over to those that have requested that it be open for discussion. So the first was a suggestion of a cap on council travel expenses. And I believe it was Councillor Gore that wanted this brought forward. So happy to pass that over, and just to note that this policy was revised by council in June of 2023 to clarify expectations on attendance at events, but not so much on the cost. So.
Yes, Council Gore, the floor is yours. I'm not sure.
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
This was more to get information from staff in terms of how council members and what are they eligible for in claiming the travel expenses. My understanding was that we as council members are allowed certain events that we attend, whether it's UBCM, AVICC, and now the VIDEA. So, and where in the budget is this allocated? Is this a line item in the budget that talks about travel expenses, or is it coming out of our contingency? My understanding as we nominated members to FCM was that there will be no cost to the Parksville taxpayers. So I want to get some background, and I think it's important for me personally to understand in terms of expenses that members can claim, and why is there no limit on how much we as council members can claim in terms of travel expenses?
If I may, through the mayor, I'll take a first stab at this, but our CAO may want to add some. All of the travel expenses related to conferences and such are within that legislative expenditures line in the financial plan. And it's all the costs of registration for conference, travel for conference, your per diems for whatever food might not be included. It's only been taken out of contingency when it was one-off type items. So the extra council members that wanted to go to the VIA, whatever it is, we took that last year's financial plan out of council contingency because typically had it just been the mayor that had attended in the past. I think that there are actually only so many go to FCM, but I think everyone is budgeted to go to UBCM. And Kiva, maybe you could add to that.
If I may, through the mayor. So there's a couple of things that are automatically included in the budget that the policy outlines. It's been a little while since you guys had it before you, but we can send the link around. But basically, there's a table in the policy that says each year staff will budget for all of the council members to attend UBCM. All of the council members will be budgeted to attend AVICC. Each year, the mayor and one additional councillor is budgeted to attend FCM, and that kind of rotates through individuals. And then I believe we also added VIA, but that would be through the budget process every year. So that would be added into the line item. And basically what we do is our staff look at, okay, when UBCM is in Victoria, how much is that going to cost? If UBCM is in Kelowna, we factor that in. So each year we look at where it's going to be and we put an item in the budget for that. Same for AVICC, like the last few times it's been in Nanaimo, so we've put it down a little bit per counselor. That being said, we know that not all 7 attend everything. Like usually it's kind of at most 5 people, just given all of your other commitments that you have. So that's how we kind of come up with that item that goes in the budget every year. The other piece of that is if something comes up throughout the year, council has the ability to add permission for that individual or for 1 or 2 people to attend an event. And you can either use council contingency or fund that from accumulated surplus, but there must be a resolution of council. So I can't think of a good example of when we've done that, but say there was a recent new conference that the City of Victoria put out, but it was kind of short notice. But if, using that as an example, if council decided we really want somebody to be there, then you could throughout the year pass a motion to send somebody for that. So that gives you flexibility if something unique, or actually I think UBCM had a housing thing that a couple of folks might have gone to that we didn't know about. It's not an annual thing. So
Housing summit.
yeah, housing summit. Thank you. So the long long answer is that we have a certain amount of things that are automatically included that we believe council wants to attend. And there's flexibility through a council resolution that you can add things that are unexpected or that we don't know about. And that's the majority of council would have to approve that particular item. And you can then also provide direction on how it's funded. And so usually it has been from council contingency. But if it was something that either a year that you didn't have contingency left, council would then have to decide where that comes from. And usually that would come from accumulated surplus in those cases.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So thank you, CAO. If I may go a little bit into detail here, how much does staff typically budget year to year in those legislative expenses for council? It should not change too much though, about 50,000. How much is this line item typically?
I'm going to talk off the top of my head because I haven't done it myself I did this when I was the director of admin. So my recollection is it's about, again, depending how far you have to travel. One year it was at Powell River, which is a bit trickier to get to. Another year it might be in Nanaimo. So I think on average it's about $2,000 per person estimated. So 15,000 for UBCM and for AVICC. It's probably 20,000 now, just that I haven't done it for a few years, but Amanda can probably try and pull it up on as we're speaking. But we do kind of base it on, like I say, staff will look at, do counselors have to fly? Can they drive? Do they have to take ferries? Is it a 4-day event or a 2-day event? And we kind of guess what the estimates will be. But I would say off the top of my head, it is about $2,000. You guys do your expenses. I think I'm kind of in the ballpark on that once you attend those events. So for a few nights of hotel, your travel, per diems, and the conference fees, that's, I would say roughly it's around that amount, but we can get you the actual amounts in the process.
Sorry, thank you. The reason I brought this up for council to have a discussion and perhaps come at a decision on this. If there's certain allocated amount, like you mentioned, sounds like what you say is there's not much of a discretion on a council member. Hey, I want to attend these extra things, so my expenses would be way more. So hearing that, I would guess that what council members claim in a year should not vary too much, depending on we all almost go to the same events. We all stay in the same hotels, like you are booking everything. But since we saw the last year's financials, there was differences in the claims, in the amount of monies being claimed as travel expenses. I was curious, why is there so much variance? I know previously council talked about having $5,000, let's say, allocated to a council member. So at their discretion, they can attend certain conferences that are of their interest. So I want to see if council members still think that would be better. So, yeah.
CEO Kayla, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I think that's certainly an option. I guess the only caution I would add there is that if somebody is attending an event representing the city of Parksville, there could be some sensitivities or concerns around events being completely random. Because I think council would have to establish some clear expectations around if you're attending an event that maybe the majority of council would have a different opinion than what you're attending. And so not to say you can't do that as a council, but staff have only ever, I guess, proposed that we automatically have those AVICC UBCM events. If council wished to have like a spending account and folks could just do whatever they thought was right with the $5,000 amount, that's up to council. But I will say that I could see some potential issues coming up around that, not with this council per se, because I think you all have good communication and chat with each other around, what you would say as a City of Parksville representative. But that's just one challenge that I think might arise. And maybe if I may just address the other piece, I would say it is pretty consistent across councillors over the years, but there are those one-off events, like sometimes if you go to FCM, you're going to have a higher cost that year, and that rotates through council. Also, if you were appointed by the city to be a representative for some group, the expectation would be that if council approves that, you're authorized to go, right, to attend. So on the whole, I would say my experience is it is pretty similar. Sometimes the mayor might have higher costs if the mayor is appointed as the economic development officer, and sometime the mayor was the only person that went to VIA, so they would have a higher cost. So it's on the whole, I would say it's not like one person's going to 20 things and they're having higher costs. And again, council can put a cap on it, but I think that does limit your flexibility in terms of if something comes up that you're not aware of. Like we have so much dynamic things happening provincially that I think having that flexibility of a council resolution to, again, the majority of you decide whether something's worth going to, that gives you that option, right? It still has to come to council, it still has to be discussed, and maybe that is also an opportunity for you to talk with the person who's being appointed to go on what the expectations are and have them, you know, report back to the community or come up with recommendations. So my only caution would be just be on being too prescriptive that you back yourselves into a corner where you're not able to take advantage of some of those unforeseen events. But
Yeah, my comments, if it's not broken, why are we attempting to change it? That's my biggest thing is, and the other thing is that I'm not sure you're suggesting that maybe some council members have higher expenses than others. But that is all in the Sophie report. So those expenses that are claimed by that particular council is in the Sophie report. So if you wanted that information, you staff can give you that information. That's what's broken down in the Sophie report. It's an annual report that comes out and lists exactly what we spend and who spends it. I would suggest if you feel that it's one is not valid or something like that, I think that you should check into those figures and then address that exactly what you feel is not valid. Perhaps I think would be a good direction to go, Councillor Gorb. As for the public's benefit, every receipt is demanded by our staff anyways before we make any expense claim. There has to be a receipt for it. It has to be approved, and that is actually approved by the CAO as a legitimate expense. And so it's not room for really error on that case, but those records are all available for you if you like to see it at any time. Yeah, you're okay. Just give me a follow-up if you want it for my, Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, I will echo that you know, if it's not broken, maybe don't mess with it. I do think that what we have works quite well. But that being said, I know I've spoken with other councillors from other cities across the country, and some do have slightly different procedures. So for instance, they might, out of a selection of, you know, FCM and the provincial and something local, they can go to 2. So it depends. So sometimes more people go to FCM from a particular municipality than others. So, you know, which was interesting. But I will also go back to when I was on council previously, and a conference came up that I thought would be of particular interest for our community around placemaking and active transportation and planning, and an international conference that was going to be held in Vancouver. So as opposed to Geneva, Switzerland, which is where it was the year prior. So I certainly wanted to take advantage of that and came before council, and council agreed that I was able to attend, and it was very informative and stimulating, of course. And then when I came back to council, I was able to report out. So things do come along sometime, and the way it is set up at present, somebody might see something that seems very relevant to, or is very relevant to our priorities, and can bring it to council to say yay or nay.
Right, and thank you for that, Councillor Beale. And when you did attend that extra conference, it was discussed in the public forum. Yes, it discussed in the public forum where the council agreed to it, and it was probably paid for out of contingency. If you had anything left in it, they'd say, yes, there's money in the contingency. This is a valid expense and let's approve this. So it's done in the public forum, and as well as your reporting out at it is also done in the public forum, as well as your receipts and so forth from attending that is also given to our financial department to make sure it's all legitimate. So and that's a good process, and it seems to be working very well. Geneva, Switzerland would have been nice. Oh, but, well, I'm not sure council would have approved that one, but anyhow, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. I definitely hear what Councillor Gore is saying. Our first year, I got to go to FCM, which is in Toronto. And so FCM moves around every year. They try to spread that convention throughout the country so that not just one city benefits from having thousands of delegates to represent local governments. And so that first year, the mayor was supposed to go with me, and then he had, a definitely good reason to not attend, even though he wanted to. And so that put, of the two that we can send that year to FCM in Toronto, which is obviously more expensive than if we were in Vancouver for flights, that put my expenses for FCM higher than everyone else's because I was the only one who went. Say this year, we sent two members to FCM in Calgary. And so those two will likely, if my math is right, be a little bit higher than everyone else. And then we'll go through this FCM thing, which is kind of to me, the special event throughout the year that we only send two, and it's a bit more expensive than say UBCM. Now, if there's counselors that don't go to UBCM or AVICC and they don't think that it's worth going, well, then their expenses are going to be obviously quite lower. For myself, I have found that most of them are worth my time. VIAA this year, that was my first time going. Next year, I would probably pass, just for the value that I felt that I got as a counselor. AVICC and UBCM, I thought they've been exceptional for me, and I've tried to bring very good value back to the city of Parksville. For instance, if something comes up for us to decide on, and we decide a certain way, and then maybe it comes up on the hospital board at the RDN, and we didn't see that coming. Thankfully, the relationships that I've built at the AVICC UBCM level, I'm down in Victoria for one of those events at no cost to the city of Parksville taxpayers, but I figure out who to speak to, and I build a little relationship there with a minister, and that ends up, in my opinion, easily balancing out probably more than all of our expenses for the next 4 years, for our entire term, that conversation that I built with having a relationship with a certain minister. So to me, the bigger question is not how much are we spending, it's the quality that we get from the money that we do spend. And so that's what I always try to keep in mind. Thanks.
Great. Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the cost because it isn't our money, it's the taxpayers' money, the cost of anything we do. And I also believe the flexibility. I mean, the housing thing came up very suddenly, and we had to have 2 people there. And so we have to have that flexibility. And also we're spending our time, personal time doing this besides our responsibilities. So I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it, keep it going as is, with the flexibility to understand that these important events are there for us to learn and to share for the city and the taxpayers. So that I support this. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Martin. First time speaker, Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been mentioned a few times, the if it ain't broke thing. And I am a bit concerned because it was clearly described when these questions were raised last time as to why some expenses were higher for some councillors than others. That raising it now, I'm just concerned, hopefully Councillor Gore will clarify that there's no implication here that it is broken in some way.
Councillor Gore.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So the intent wasn't to pick on one councillor or the mayor or somebody's expenses being higher than others. The more was to have this discussion and clarification on this line item. If we are only budgeting $20,000, clearly we spent way over 20,000. If my math is right, doing the expenses for the councillors from last year. So either we are not budgeting enough in that line item and we are drawing on the reserves, or previously it was thought that perhaps the $5,000 limit that we were talking about expenses to the council members could be an appropriate way for members to have a discussion on attending events which they think would bring more benefit to the community. It was more of a discussion rather than saying a policy is broken or it needs further amendment or anything. More to just clarity of like getting an idea from the FCM perspective is definitely helps that there is more expenses with certain events. However, when the CEO is saying that we're only budgeting $20,000, I don't think we are budgeting enough.
No. Yeah, CAO,
Is it-
Kayla, if you could clear that up. That not the
Thank
case.
you, through the mayor. So we're just looking at our actuals and our budgeted amounts. So as I mentioned, we base it on each event. So there's UBCM, AVICC, and then BYLAWS, I believe, now through council resolution. And then we also, in your first term, we have LGLA, which is that sort of orientation piece that you have. So we look at where each of those events is going to be hosted, and we do a guess on what does each person's expense look like, depending on how far they have to go. And so as of August, we're quite a bit under what we projected because not everybody attends. We have to assume that all 7 members might want the opportunity to go to those kind of automatic events. But typically speaking, I believe it's no more than 5 most of the time. There's usually 2 counselors that have work commitments or some other thing that they can't attend. So typically we have not been over budget because of that. But some years, if all 7 counselors went to everything, we would be pretty close to being on budget. And we can look at, like, we know what the per diems are. We know generally what the costs of the registration are. So we're pretty close. If anything, we're under. So that just gets basically rolled back into the surplus if there's a year where folks don't attend, or sometimes if somebody went to a unexpected event, we would offset it with that same budget. So I also think, not to be kind of, flippant about the costs, but it's a very small amount. In some other cities, people do get paid for their time. So you get paid per meeting, and that would be, significantly higher, obviously, for council members that are attending those events. And I think Councillor Martin kind of started talking about that, but it is a very significant commitment on people's time that they're not getting additional reimbursed or additional remuneration for. When we were reviewing this policy back in the summer of 2023, we did look at, lots of cities have mileage and, you can charge lunch if you go and meet with somebody in the community. We don't allow any of that. And so I think what we kind of discovered when we did the review was that we were definitely on the more conservative side of what is allowed for expenses, and that you're not even allowed, even if the mayor takes somebody for lunch in the city or in the region, they're not charging that to the taxpayers. So, I think we have to be mindful of the commitment that people put there as well. All of you know that, sitting around the table. So I would say from our perspective, this isn't a red flag for us, and that we're, overspending what's expected, or we're seeing counselors go to frivolous events. That would just be kind of my staff observation as the person who signs the expenses.
So we're not dipping into reserves. Yeah. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to Councillor Gore, I don't feel like you're picking on me, but it was more the mayor picked on me because he didn't go with me to FCM in Toronto that year. And so that kind of made a significant difference in our travel expenses for that year. So I blame the mayor, Councillor Gore, not yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my fault, but I didn't go, so we saved that expense. So. Carry on. So we have Jenna, back to you. Next page. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item was requested by Councillor Martin and is consideration of pay in lieu of benefits for council members. And just a bit of background on this, the UBCM has a benefit plan for elected officials, but the deadline is earlier in the term. And council made a decision in January of 2023 not to go with that benefits plan. The report was brought from staff with respect to that. So I'll turn it over to Councillor Martin to express her thoughts around that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, CAO Kiever, for putting this on our list. I had brought it up because I felt that it was something that the staff here had. So why, if someone did not have a medical plan, could there not be a medical plan? Then I thought more about this. And really, wouldn't it attract people of all backgrounds to run for council when you think about it? I never thought about it to myself, but I was thinking about the total bigger picture of medical plans. Since there's already some in place, couldn't we be a part of something like that? It's sort of like a no-brainer in our society today. Medical plans are quite common in their works, and we do work, as I find out, right? We do work at this. So I'm just asking if I talked to our CAO and she said, well, this year it's out of this term, it's out of the question because it's over. You had to do it in the first few months. And so she recommended their casual employees get an 8% uplift on their income to do with a medical plan. And that is done. I know other people have had this too, not here. But if that would be a consideration, I think that would be good for now. But also in that support of that, then for the next council, you know, maybe they have to understand it, or maybe we do a motion to allow them to be a part of a medical plan that's around, whether it's UBCM or the one that the staff have here in the city, because it seems like such a part of our society, very much so. So I was wanting the support for that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Martin. I'm perplexed. Because do you not recall, like at the start of our session, the start of our term, this subject came up about the medical benefit plan. It came up once. It came up once when we all voted on it, and I remember it distinctly because I thought too that personally that it was a good package for council. And it came up to a vote once because we have to get in at that time. It was within 6 months, I think, of being elected. And it was turned down by this council. And I, although disappointed, I respected council's decision, and that's where it went. And so it was decided by this council not to opt in. And then it came up again, I recall, another one, and I actually talked to Councillor Gore and others about it. And we said, I was at some event at the provider, it was UBCM in this case, said, oh, you didn't get in on it within. I said, yeah, we're past the deadline. And they said, oh, we'll extend the deadline for you. And it's like, if you get a resolution from your council, and we did it again, and it didn't pass again. So I said, okay. So that was at least 6 months after the first go round. And so we already have decided as a council that this council didn't feel it was a worthwhile expense to the taxpayer for benefits for the council. So we've already had that 2 opportunities and it was turned down. I'm not sure why it's coming up now.
Well, I had the occasion to be carpooled back from our last conference with a councillor from Qualicum.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, it's an automatic thing. They get the same medical plan that they have at their council. In fact, I'm not going to say about the remuneration, but they have a lot more income from their consideration of being a councillor. And so I thought, I'll bring it up again because I think it's well worthwhile if we think about this for the future, that not just people like myself, but others might want to be on council. And we want a variety of citizens and backgrounds of people, not necessarily in medical plans that they haven't got one. Why wouldn't we have one? So that's why I brought it back up again. It was a comparison from Qualicum to us. And they're a small city, smaller than we are. And they have all in medical plan for their councillors. And I did not know that. I did not have that information. And they're in our region. So I thought that I'd bring it back again. Thank you.
Yes, but I believe in the town of Qualicum Beach that their council approved that. They're voted on it, so that, but we can't revisit it again at this particular point. We're past the deadline for doing it, and so this, You're suggesting that the 8%.
The idea
so
with it
that's
would
what
be,
you're.
yeah,
yeah,
8%.
Okay.
Because this is what Kiva, our CAO, Kiva, suggested that could be done in lieu of a medical plan.
Okay,
So
sure.
there you go.
So I would, okay, so this is just speaking to the, now I understand, thank you. That it's just, you're seeking just the 8% payment to be made to each council member. And is that made to each council member even though those council members don't need it? Because some of them have benefits already in play. Not sure how that plays out.
That would be up to each counselor, I would think, say, oh, I don't need it or I need it. Would that work, Doug? I don't know that.
If I may, Mr. Mayor.
Implementation.
CAO Kaler?
So Councillor Martin approached me to ask about the benefits, and that is not an option at the moment, given the decisions that were made earlier. And so I did recommend that Councillor Martin bring this idea to council instead of the other option, because that is something that if you're not a full-time employee, there's a lot of common practice around the payment in lieu of benefits. But in this situation, all of council would have to opt in. I don't think we would have the ability or the staff capacity to give little bits of things here and there. It would need to be a council decision that because the option of the benefit plan has expired, the only other option for the remainder of this term would be kind of a payment in lieu of a benefit plan. And I agree that, council voted on the benefit plan more than one time. The next council will have that opportunity again, and I believe that's what every council just decides when they take office.
Yes. Thank you. Do you want to put in, okay, just a, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is it possible, could you clarify or to our CAO that dollar amount there? This is per year. This is for that would be the total cost per year, I take it. Is that correct?
If I may, through the mayor, yes, this is based on the current remuneration times 8% times 7 people. And so it was 23,506, I believe. And that would be an annual, so that's 8% per year. So if council were to approve this, we would need to amend the budget to add that amount. And most likely we would have to amend the bylaw, the remuneration bylaw, to reflect that there's a payment in lieu. And that would go to the end of your term. And then the next council administration would have the option to opt into the benefit plan within the first few months of their term.
Councillor Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, I wasn't expecting this necessarily. I would actually like to defer this so that we can get more insight into our budget overall and have this come back. Could it be deferred until a certain point in the budget deliberations?
Go ahead, Councillor, or CAO, Councillor.
Thank you. If I may, yes, that's fine. What we're trying to do at the end of this is bring kind of the big, long master list of items to council. But what we're trying to achieve early on is if something's an absolute no, you tell us, don't spend any more time on that one. If it's something that is worthy of consideration and you want to look at it in the context of all the other requests and budget items, then we will just keep it going on the running list. And at the end of this process, which I think will be around November 18th, you will have to make decisions on the priorities and what you're actually funding from that big list of things that make it to the next stage. So some things we're trying to take off the list early on if council's really sure that that's not something they want to fund.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes,
follow-up?
I would like to consider this a bit later in that larger context.
Yeah. And
I don't want a hard no right now.
Yeah, we don't have a motion on the floor to defer at this particular point, but I would just go back to Councillor Martin. Did you want to bring it to the floor and have a decision made today, or with the as long as it's seconded, obviously, but at the same time, or would you rather just leave this on a maybe list when we're discussing finance?
Do I have to make a motion to that regard, or do we just?
Well, no, if you just say you don't want to do anything with it, except for as Councillor Beal suggested, we just bring it up in the financial plan.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't want to like.
No, I don't have to
hard
make a
yes or
motion.
hard no today?
No, no.
Okay. If you're okay with that?
Yeah,
then
sure.
Sure.
We defer it
Sure.
to when we do the whole decision. It's the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And our costs, right? And I
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah.
Sure.
Absolutely.
If you're okay with that, then that's
Yeah,
great.
That's fine.
Okay.
If I may, I don't think we really need a motion on that one. We're really just getting
Yeah.
motions on the ones to take off.
All that I asked staff to do, if they can include it in as part of the agenda of the financial plan anyways, that this be a consideration at that time. And then we can make that decision then. Good. Councillor Wood?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a clarification that this number, if it wasn't used by certain councillors or the mayor, would carry over to the next year or something, or is it?
You can't.
Okay, it's part of the plan.
Yeah, if I
Well-
may, I don't think we would have the capacity to do that differentially. It would basically just be a decision that the remuneration be increased by 8% for everybody.
And just as a clarification, you weren't asking for retroactive or anything to start a term? Oh, just moving forward?
This is just the concept and a principle for sure. I mean, principle. Like I said, in our society, this is the way. And then I started talking to other counselors in other areas and I was surprised, honestly, that this wasn't passed originally. So there we go. I never thought about it again until I had another counselor tell me what they do in their communities. So there you go. So if we
Did you
can
have
just defer it. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor
Thank you.
Grant.
Thank you. I had a question through the mayor to staff that I guess could come up in the committee of the whole, but I may as well ask it now. With regard to the extended health benefits that were brought before council at the beginning of our term, is that going to be the plan moving forward to bring that as an option to each council every 4 years?
If I may, if I recall, the last time we actually had a discussion with the council, and the council asked us to go, like we had something come to us before Christmas, and we were asked from council to go and look into the options, and then we brought a report back with a bylaw to change the remuneration, and then council defeated it. So I think it will be in the orientation package, and it would be up to that council to decide whether they wanted to prioritize that. I think basically that's kind of how it came about with this council, is we kind of talked about, here's what your package looks like. And, you know, in the orientation discussions, we explain kind of what you get as a new counselor, and that's where that conversation originated. At least that's my recollection. But yeah, I think we could automatically bring it, but normally we take direction from the new council based on what they kind of bring to us. We don't want to be presumptuous that that's a priority for the new folks sitting around the table.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you. If I may follow up on that, Mayor, thank you for that clarification. I think it's hard for a new council to maybe decide on these sorts of things like their remuneration when they just take office. And I would definitely be interested to see whether something, maybe an option to either accept the extended health benefits, or this sort of option to be brought to each council as maybe an option, or for this council to put something in place for the next council before that comes about. But I thought that there was something where it was initiated under the previous council and then just kind of didn't get completed until it made it to this council.
If I may, we can certainly add it to our orientation list of questions and have council decide whether they want to advance it or not. That's pretty easy for us to do.
At the next council. Yes, thank you. Okay,
Sorry,
Good.
because the timeline will most likely be the same.
exactly, you're right. Thanks. Okay, let's move on. Thanks. Thanks. That's on the agenda for the next financial meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next item was requested by Councillor Beal, and it was consideration of rebates for the purchase of AEDs by nonprofits. Just FYI, an AED is approximately $4,000. The ones that we bought recently last year for 3 different facilities were 3,500 plus. So just ballparking at 4,000. Yeah.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Beal, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the ones that I had looked up were more like 1,200, but then you also need to have the whatever you're going to mount it in so that it can, so I think it was closer to 2,000. I was looking into this a little bit. I'm thinking it particularly, I noticed I was at an event, I'll tell you, at the Macmillan Arts Center. Many elderly folks at the event as well, and it was in the evening, and looked around and there was no AED there. I have been asking around, and it does seem that many, if not most, organizations that have an actual physical spot do in fact have these, but there may be some others that don't. But I inquired the museum, they have something on site. Of course, SOS has something on site. I believe all the schools have something on site. So in fact, the Arts Council might be the only one that doesn't right now. So, but I just thought it was something to consider, but I don't know how, sort of boots on the ground. I don't know how big a need this is. If it's only for one organization, I know that the library, when I'm being on the library board, that was approved to the library board and was able to get grants for this. So I think it's something to consider if there's a need out there. But again, if it's only one or two places, then maybe we don't need to set it up as a rebate. But I don't know what other people's thoughts or experiences with this.
Councillor Gore.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I was wondering why can't those organizations use the grants, whether the city or the RDN gives, towards the purchase of this equipment? Why should city be giving rebates on medical equipment like AED? For the number, we don't even know how much is needed.
Councillor Beal.
I'm actually not aware of particular grants, not that I have looked into that greatly. I think that there were some grants at certain times, but I'll be honest, I didn't specifically ask for this to come up. It was a conversation that did come about, just wondering if there were some things that we could do to assist organizations, understanding that we're talking about nonprofits that are used heavily by our citizens, right? I mean, I'm not talking about nonprofits that somehow just have their own little group. These are open to the public. And so that was my question. Like I said, I understand that the museum already has something that I'm sure the RDN has everything in place in all of their buildings. So if it's only one organization, perhaps they can come with a request for some assistance if that's needed. And I'm sure that organizations are also looking for grant opportunities to cover these. I don't know if Island Health has any grants, et cetera. So I'm not suggesting that the city necessarily cover this, but if there was a need, I thought it was something that we should entertain.
So, I would ask council if, I'm not sure if you want to put it through to resolution to it's kind of open-ended, Councillor Beal. You're suggesting that may only be one, and then is raised that perhaps, as Councillor Gore has suggested, that, they could apply for grants, like our grants. But as well as nonprofits, they're very good at grant writing for a health aid. I know of a lot of organizations that have AEDs in place anyways. They have done their own fundraising in-house. They didn't come to the city, and I see them everywhere, and they have been used as well, which is great. But I see them all over the place, and I've never up until this time actually had a request come to the city as if the city funded it. But personally, I don't think I have an appetite for this at this time, but that's just me. But that's up to council to weigh in if you want to support this. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
When I had the conversation about this earlier, I wasn't necessarily suggesting that there be a full cost either in that particular case. More out of the conversation came the idea that perhaps just as we have rebates for rain barrels and rebates for low flush toilets, that perhaps something like that might assist organizations. But again, it was a conversation at that time, and I did not bring back a request for this to be a specific budget item.
Okay, so we'll leave it at that. And then if some council wants to bring it forward as a resolution, then we'll leave it at that. Is that good? Okay, thank you. Jetta, if we can go to
Right.
the converting the tennis side shared racket courts.
Right. So this was brought forward by Councillors Gore and Grenz, and looking at converting the tennis side of the shared racket courts in the community park to permanent pickleball courts. Possible funding might be the Canada Community Building Fund or the Parks Reserve. And that would be creating 4 new permanent pickleball courts, with the result being there'd be no tennis in the community park. It would all be at Springwood Park. And a suggestion that this would be a 2026 work plan item and perhaps be done in concert with the work that's been proposed for the lacrosse box. So do all those community park items at the same time. So looking for direction on that.
Go to Councillor Grenz or Councillor Gore. Do you want to speak to this? Councillor Gore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So it has put us in a pickle, hasn't it? The pickleball issue has been before this council, previous council, and the council before. They've been asking for a designated facility for a long time. We know it's a motivated group of people. We all know the medical and the health benefits of pickleball, keeping our folks active. So myself and Councillor Grenz, we met with some of those elected officials, I guess, from those clubs to speak about what their needs are and what they think Parksville and Oceanside in general can do to meet the demands of the growing clubs. First of all, as you're aware, they're planning on amalgamating the 2 clubs, have 1 club represent all the pickleball players in Oceanside. So having met those members, the outcome was that there's a strong desire to have a dedicated facility where there's still a tennis court down at the beach. So having those 8 courts plus the work that will be done at the lacrosse box, in club's opinion, that will suffice the need for all the pickleball courts that are needed, even to hold tournaments and bigger events for the club. To just sweeten up the deal, in our talks with those members, the club is also willing to contribute financially upfront, as well as whatever happens on an ongoing basis through donation to the city, whatever it may, user fee as we are probably working on. So we have this large advocacy that we've seen on part of those pickleballers, and I know previously council was looking at building a facility at, I don't know, $2 million or something for pickleball, which the staff mentioned initially in our term. So having a designated facility for pickleballers at $40,000 and the work be done alongside the lacrosse box, cost savings, in my opinion. And I think we can be a great venue for big pickleball events. This is a growing need, as we've seen in our community, and especially like being a tennis player myself, I have not really played tennis at the beach, not even once actually last summer. But we know that facility, even though I would like it to be multi-use, but it's not really used by our community members or visitors as much. And like staff mentioned, there's already a dedicated facility at Springwood Park, the very nice tennis courts, beautiful tennis courts. So I hope council sees the benefit of this to not just a group of vocal pickleball players, but also kind of building a legacy for future pickleball players. Once we have a dedicated facility, in my opinion, we will see more uptake from community, younger folks. So that's my spiel for this.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll do a spiel maybe in part as well. And I know that the mayor's also had conversations with folks from pickleball, but this issue, as we know, has been batted about quite a lot over the years. I'm going to try to bring some more puns into this if I can. Another appealing aspect to this, besides what Councillor Gore has raised, and I will actually first underline one of the appealing aspects of this, is that the previous proposal was significantly more expensive, but it seems that the pickleball community is pleased with this proposal, which would be nice to put this to bed in that regard, and finally bring to our community a more dedicated pickleball facility at a reasonable price. But we've been speaking about synergies today. I think there are synergies on this in that staff is planning on looking at policies around use of facilities and how different organizations will participate in those costs and upkeep of those facilities. There is a proposal, as Councillor Gore mentioned, for the Pickleball Association to contribute financially to this, which would be covered within any proposed policy that might be coming down the pike. The other synergy, of course, has been mentioned around work being done in the community park that would dovetail with this proposed work, and then would allow us to do the pickleball community, allow them to do more events in the community park that will also help sort of all the different aspects that we talk about as part of our strategic plan for recreation opportunities in the community. So thank you.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. It was the estimated cost, was that cost estimated provided by the pickleballers or by our staff? Okay. CA.
If I may, this was thank you, through the mayor, this was a quick estimate by our manager Parks based on a scope of removing the tennis lines and the tennis holes, like where the nets
Yes.
are, and converting it to full pickleball on both sides.
Yes.
So it might be a little bit off, but that was a pretty reasonable estimate of the work that would be needed.
Thank you. And then one other quick question of, we've had various user groups come to us and say they want to do a cash contribution to some of it. We understand that it could be part of the user fee agreement, but thinking on this on the weekend, is there any way until we got a proper universal user fee agreement in place, can we accept cash donations from any organization, whether it be pickleballers, volleyballers, or anything like that? Can we do that until we get this in place? Just because they're offering and they're raising it from their members, and they have the ability to do so, and they're willing to do that. So is there any way, aside of a total universal approach?
If I may, I'll offer my thoughts, and the CFO can correct me if I'm going too creative with the accounting. I don't see any reason why we couldn't. We have accepted bequeaths and other donations from folks who just ask for a plaque sometimes or for some kind of recognition. And we've also received things in trust for particular things. We do get donations of in-kind, like equipment or work from various different organizations on a bit of a one-off. And I think in advance of a policy that forces people to pay, I don't see any immediate issue with someone voluntarily donating for an investment in an amenity that they quite like. It's sort of similar to our amenities that we receive now as part of development in my mind, but I'll look at Jetta and see if she's wincing while I say that.
Through the mayor, it's all good. Yeah, we've had various scenarios, the theater being one where there was in-kind and cash contributions, and all that we need to do is we record it in our financial statements as a contribution towards that. Even if it's in kind, we record it and try and estimate that is. So if it's cash, that's by far the easiest.
Thank you. And question to the delegates. Did the amalgamated group as such, did they bandy about a figure and so forth that they may be willing to come up with? Is it something that you can obtain for us, or is it general knowledge?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think there was a letter that was sent to all of council this morning or yesterday, I'm not sure, from,
That was from Ernie. That's a different group.
right. Just an estimate, in my talks with the members, I think they're willing to meet us halfway, about $20,000. And on an ongoing basis contribution, I think that will depend on their membership fee that they're willing to impose on every member. And I think very good solid numbers because they have a huge membership. That's something, I don't know, still needs to be figured out. I don't want to give a number and can excite everybody. This sounds like a great financial contribution annually. But it's a significant number that the group is willing to.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that, Councilor Gore, is because I'm just doing the math, right? If it's going to cost 40,000, but we know
Right.
we've got 20 Gs already, then we only have to build 20 Gs into the financial plan. I'm just trying to be totally logical here.
And just to be through you, Mayor, this will not be in this year's budget, but rather next year, correct? If you're looking at 2026 for the works to
For the
start.
work plan.
Yeah, if I may, through the mayor, that's what staff would request based on the workload, but also on the synergies that we would be able to gain with if council approves the renovation of the lacrosse box, it's most likely going to be the same contractor. So we would only have to mobilize them one time and do one contract. So it would be more efficient from a staff perspective. So that's our recommendation, but you don't have to take that if you don't want to.
If I may,
Yeah,
just a
Jenna.
couple of comments, although it would be 2026 work plan in the spirit of a 5-year financial plan, we would want to put it in the plan now in
Right.
2026. And my only other comment is that would be very similar to when we put the scoreboard in at the baseball. It was a half and half where
Yes.
that
I
cost
remember
was shared.
that.
So it'd be
Yes.
very similar to that arrangement.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a good comparison.
Right.
Yeah, exactly that. And that worked really well. They contributed to the scoreboard. So yeah, I like that. Yes. It has all sorts of synergy, the energy that we're expressing here today. Synergy, energy. Yes. I think that's good. Let's, I believe, do we need a resolution for this, or do we need to just?
If I may, we don't really need resolutions on the items that are advancing because
Right.
they'll come back to council as part of that master list with everything in context. We're really only hoping for council to say, absolutely not. We're just don't even include it in the calculations. And that
Right.
makes it a little bit easier for us to do that final analysis.
Okay, and so by having the description from the staff, when it's going to happen, but we need it in our financial plan now, we know the urgency of that part is urgent, get in our financial plan, and making it happen will happen as the work plan allows. And with the scope of the lacrosse box project, if approved by council, it will run at the same time. So with all that in mind, I think it's good to carry on. Councillor Martin, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, and then there's another councillor that has a question or comment too. I think this is good. I just wanted to know, was there any comments from the tennis people? Because I would like to find out that, because I know my family has played tennis there forever and they still play tennis there. It's sort of like a vision. I just wanted to mention that, so I'm not questioning whether this is a good or bad thing. I think pickleball is excellent. I played it myself. So, but I'd like to know about tennis. We haven't heard a word about tennis right now.
Yes, I
Thank
believe Councillor Gore has actually spoken to the Springwood Tennis Association. So Councillor Gore, comment please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yes, Councillor, I did speak with the president of the Aerosmith Tennis Club. And he was quite pleased that there will be no, when two sports kind of fighting for the same court. He's happy that the pickleballers have their facility and the tennis courts in Springwood are enough for what the club needs. He did mention, I think, and I spoke with the CAO, perhaps some signage for the tourists that might come, that if you're looking for tennis courts, they are located at Springwood Park, something like that. The club president believes is enough to meet the needs of the tourists as well as the membership of the club.
Good comments. Thank you. Great. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Gore, for that information. I was also wanting to know if the tennis people have been consulted about this, but extend further to that, because I don't play tennis, but I love to watch it, and I really enjoy seeing people, whether they're just volleying or whatever they're doing. I love watching it down there, and I do see people using that for tennis. My question is, in both scenarios, if all the tennis is, at Springwood, and if the pickleball is down in the park, will they allow for drop-in folks? Because that's where I see, whether it be tourists or somebody like myself, because what I'm hearing is club has this and clubs have that. What about people who may or may not be part of a club? And I've always thought that the tennis courts up at Springwood were not just open for anyone. I got that impression, so I could be wrong.
Oh, yeah, Judd, I can speak to Springwood. Springwood is absolutely open to everyone. Yeah, and as well as the pickleball courts, they're only booked out for certain times. They do their block bookings like through the RDN, like everybody does, just like the Bagosa people do for the fields. But there is plenty of time where it is for open, open public use. Yeah, drop in. Yes. CEO Kaler.
Thank you through the mayor. If I can just add one thing, we do have a user analysis on the work plan for 2025, and that would provide an opportunity for council to give guidance to the RDN booking people on priorities for court uses and what to do with conflict and who gets first dibs, so to speak. We're also discussing some terms that would discourage the block booking. So if there's a fee, for example, even a very small fee, that discourages people from booking when they don't need to. So those things are on the radar of staff, both at the RDN and the City of Parksville. Next year, we're going to be doing a really in-depth analysis of where those conflicts might be and bringing that back to council for some guidance on how to move that forward.
Okay, so moving forward, I see this as a carry it through to the financial plan. Thank you. Next up, go ahead, Jenna.
Great. The next item is snow clearing on sidewalks on priority pedestrian walkways. This is something that's been discussed in a few different ways over the last few years. So again, just looking at priority pedestrian walkways, estimated cost about $10,000, and we would likely contract that in the short term just because may not be staff capacity. In the longer term, that would be something for further council discussion. Perhaps there's new equipment that's needed, maybe additional staff capacity, especially during storm events. Maybe there's a service level amendment in a formal way, and additions to policy or new policy altogether. If it was this amount, suggestion just to fund that from property taxes would be about 0.5% of property taxes annually. And one thing would be to review this service level and report to council in 2026 with alongside what's found in the transportation master plan. The OCP will be in progress in terms of the fulsome review of that, as well as downtown vibrancy studies that the Business Association may be looking at as well. So having all of those outcomes may provide some further direction on this. So just some council direction, if this is something you see as urgent to be implemented sooner, do you want to just wait until those other things are done before considering it? Welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna, for this. This is kind of, you all recall anyways, this is my baby every time it snows. This is on my wish list for the reasons as discussed before, which was basically accessibility and active transportation. It gets ignored in a snowstorm in Parksville because we don't clean the sidewalks, and it's up to the businesses to do it, and they don't clean the sidewalks. Some of them do. I'll back up, and it's estimated a high of 15% may clean the sidewalks sometimes. However, I feel that I've just seen too many near misses, too many accidents and so forth. in between the people with accessibility issues and mobility devices that they use, as well as active transportation, where if you've ever, the people with the electric bikes are even out there in the snow too, and they have the big ones with the big nubby tires, so they're there. But they would be able to actually. There's no bicycle lanes left, and so the thing is, they would probably ride on the sidewalk, which in this case would be quite okay. So with that in mind, I'm fully supportive of this to be brought on into the financial plan. I think it's a cost that's providing good value for our community. And the other thing is that just a question, is it like the snow fight funds that we put aside? If we budget for $10,000 in a year and we have a total Maui winter and there is no snow, or there's less than $10,000 worth type of thing, does that amount get carried forward and go into the next one? So there's a carry forward then component to it. Then
Yeah.
does that accumulate and then we put 10,000 aside every year? Or as I understand, this looks like this is a first year to implement it for now type of thing. And then we'll reevaluate it at the end of a winter season.
I think what you just
Okay.
said, yeah,
Okay.
it's a kind of try it out,
Yeah.
let's see how it goes, and
Yes.
including identifying which routes and things like that and reporting back on that. But certainly with the new reserves policy, one of the reserves is that kind of cold weather item. So if there was a surplus in our snow clearing and sidewalk clearing operationally, yes, that would get rolled in for the year when we spent way more on that, and then it would be available.
Right, so after a year, we'd have a better handle of what it costs and whether like a contractor does it and, like what those fees look like. I don't know what they charge, like it's
Right.
somebody with a little Bobcat type of thing. So yes, I'm fully supportive. Okay. CAO Kaler, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. If I may, it will be important, I think, after this 2-year period, to appropriately update our policy. One of the really critical things that our insurer, MIA, says is that the policy for snow clearing really needs to come from council. And that helps us if there are any unforeseen events. And so we're proposing this because there's a lot of things going on. We still have the master transportation plan coming to a close. We have some OCP visioning. The downtown folks are working on priority areas for them in terms of where we would invest, those efforts. So I think if we do it for the next couple of years, kind of as not an ad hoc, but like as a test, we can then bring back the objectives and solidify that in policy from council, which will protect the city in the long run, and determine at that point whether it's internal with adaptive machinery that we can add to our current things that we own, or whether we need to have a longer term plan and buy a couple of different little, whatever they're called, tractor thingies. But I think this is a good way to achieve exactly what you're mentioning. We know that this was a priority for discussion previous years. So this is a way to kind of get us halfway there and then solidify it after some of those items are completed.
And that's an excellent process. And I like that. So far, we're just in the snow. We don't know what we're doing. I would call on Councillor Martin. You've had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes. The PDBA, would this be just the downtown area or all the way out, all of Parksville for snow removal? Because the PDBA, and I was going to do it in my report today, but they are getting their report in January for their vision for Parksville. Thank you.
CAO Kaler, yeah, they identified the key areas.
Yeah, so if I may, we would use probably like our definitions of like arterial streets and the more important network streets and focus on, where we kind of similar to where we plow. And then again, that would be a test, and we would just kind of do a continuous improvement and review based on feedback from council, from all other stakeholders, if that needs to be adjusted. And then that would be incorporated into the policy after a couple of seasons. And that would then just guide the service level moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And one question I have, I note that the suggestion is that it would be contracted out in the short term. Understanding that, and I will say that the east end of Highway 19A, this past year was the best ever I've seen for businesses actually clearing their sidewalks. So it was really quite impressive, but that wasn't typical. But I understand that many businesses do in fact contract to different individuals to clear, whether it be there's parking lots or in some cases there's the sidewalks as well. Knowing that there are many people out there who are looking for this kind of work and lining up contracts, is it anticipated that this would be available for multiple individuals? Because you can't clear everything all at the very same time. So would there be zones that would then be offered for a contract and work at it that way, which I think is more respectful to the people who do have businesses that are doing this kind of work, as well as just more practical. So I'm wondering how that would work.
I can only explain from Sanix what they do, but anyways, go ahead. Sarah.
If I may, through the mayor. So I think this is really a technical question for our team to figure out. But what I believe would happen is if we had a number of people lined up or contracts with folks, we would actually be able to react. So what we do now is we try to enforce the bylaw. We do education. We do lots of news releases and encourage people to follow the rules. But we see that sometimes if all the snow comes at once, our bylaw actually says you have 24 hours after the snow stops to clear. And so that still leaves a fair chunk of time where they're not in violation of the bylaw. And they may have reasons why they can't get to it right away. And so this would allow us to basically kind of react to, okay, this street is a critical street. We know people need to get there. Staff do some sidewalks, but really only kind of around our facilities. So I think it would really be up to our ops team to figure out, based on their many years of doing the snow fight, like where we would focus that. And it's a relatively small amount, so we could probably do it pretty quickly through, we would just put out for quotes. And whoever, we do kind of know who around can do it, but it would be a good test as well for them if we are going to be continuing to contract it. But I think at this point, we would really want that flexibility to be able to respond, and our guys out on the street would know kind of where the priority areas should be in advance of that being formalized in a policy moving forward.
And just for the comment, and then whatever is a successful bidder or the contractor for that, they're on a retainer. That's the city of Parksville is the first serve, because obviously they're setting out contracts for businesses in all of the locations. So you have one contractor and he's successful, but he's on a retainer. That city of Parksville is the priority here because he knows that that's a definite customer that's going to be there again next year if he performs well. You pay whatever the price is that they bid at. Our engineering department will evaluate all the bids on it, and it would usually be an hourly rate type of thing. Oh, it's usually by usage. It's you pay by the hour is what it works out to, is basically is what it is. Not just like there's some snow, because like 2 inches of snow is going to be one thing, but as compared to a 6-inch dump in overnight, everything is going to be bigger. Anyhow. So engineering can work out those details. They have lots of snow fight ability. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. We have an older demographic in our town and in our provincial riding and our federal riding. And so I really like the framing of accessibility and active transportation. I want to support this. How does the city putting money towards snow clearing on sidewalks, how does that affect our current bylaw and businesses that are currently paying maybe for their sidewalk to be cleared? Why would they continue doing so? Thank you.
CAO Kaler.
Thank you. That's a good point. And I think basically, again, we would enforce the bylaw, do the education piece. And then if we have a contracted service, we're able to kind of react if somebody is unable. We also have some orphan boulevards, I would say is probably a good way to describe them, where it's not necessarily clear who owns it, or the city has maintained it for a long time, or it's our own frontage. So I think what we would again have to do is have our staff look into the best way to kind of prioritize what gets that attention. And we would continue to enforce our bylaw and do what we do. I do think most folks are pretty good about it. But there are some situations where we kind of can't wait, I guess, for someone to be able to do it. And with the bylaws I mentioned, there is a lag where if it snows continuously for a couple of days, they really don't have to actually clear until it stops snowing for 24 hours. So there isn't really an enforcement piece there. It's really just in the past, we've kind of just not had the capacity to deal with it. So I think this is, as I mentioned, is more of a test to get some money in the budget to achieve some of the objectives. We're not going to be clearing areas all over town. It's going to be a pretty narrow focused area on some of those key transportation routes. And I think our staff are more than capable of figuring out kind of where, you know, the synergies would be in terms of, do we have bike lanes? Do we have sidewalks? Is it a busy kind of route that, you know, people would need to access key like downtown, City Hall, that sort of like services. And then we'll report back and you guys will hear if we're doing anything wrong, I'm sure, and we will be able to adjust for the following season.
Yes, that's true. Councillor Gore.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I definitely like this proposal. But like the councillor mentioned, with so many seniors and folks with mobility issues wanting to use services, going to the businesses, this is definitely, we discussed previously as well, and we see the need and the importance of this for our community members. Similar to what councillor was saying, what do other municipalities do in terms of snow fight with the SNCC, the snow and ice control? Our folks, I know they clear the arterial roads, and you mentioned the important connectors and everything. Do other municipalities clear sidewalks anywhere? Maybe on the island? Are we taking on something? Because typically, you know, you are supposed to clear your own sidewalk, like you mentioned, businesses and residential. So just want to know any context, like what do other municipalities do? Does anybody clear sidewalks?
I really don't know the answer to that. I can just maybe speak from my experience that it doesn't appear to be that case. I think that it's a very big ask for cities to do that extensively, but I think it really depends on the individual. Just like with bylaw enforcement, every city is very different, and so it depends on the individual needs. And I think all of the council members here today have said that this is something that does come up. We're very lucky that we don't get a lot of snow. And so I think for a relatively small price, we can explore it and bring back that fulsome report to council. And at that time, you can decide if you want to take a different direction. I do talk to some CAOs who have like $3 million budgets for snow fight. So, you know, in some parts of BC, it snows all the time. And I'm sure back east, it's the same, but we don't usually get extended periods. But in the last few years, we're definitely seeing more snow for several days. And so I think if we have 1 or 2 snow events that are 3 days long, we've been hearing from the community that there is a need for support on the sidewalks. And we do hear quite often of folks walking on the road, which is not recommended because the path is still so full of very wet, very heavy, hard to move snow. And so we also have a downtown that's not fully commercial. So we have people living in homes that it can be quite challenging for them to get out there and clear, you know, with their own little shovel. So I think at this point, we brought this back to council based on all of that feedback and some discussions that have happened here. And I think there's an opportunity to start something, review, and then revisit and get further direction for the long term.
May I follow up, Mayor?
Yeah, and I think this is kind of like the Mobi-Mat. It's going to be a learning curve. It's going to be a learning curve because Parksville's different than Kelowna. Definitely, you know, for snow, and even different than Comox. So to compare one to the other, I think what we're proposing here is going to be a good test to see what we can do. And then next year we'll be sitting here and let's reevaluate it. Councillor Grants, as a first-time speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am in favor of tests. But I am also in favor of clearly communicating to the public that they are in fact just a test. Because the concern is that potentially we create confusion in the community and undermine the very goal that we're trying to achieve. If people say, hey, look, the city of Parksville is now doing those sidewalks, and then people just stop doing the sidewalks, and then we have fewer sidewalks cleared than we actually would have had otherwise. So that's my concern, is that it's very, very clearly communicated. Also that it's communicated to maybe businesses that would have their sidewalks cleared, so that there's not a sense that, if there's any kind of favoritism, or why would Parksville pay to clear one sidewalk and not another one. That all needs to be clearly articulated to the community in order to not undermine the overall objective of this exercise.
Sure. Well, it's a level of service that they're going to pay for on the property taxes, whether the business taxes or property taxes. They would be paying for it. I'll be paying for it. The rest of us will be paying for it. Yes, Councillor Beal.
Thank you. I really appreciate the concerns that are brought forth as to whether or not this is something we should be doing. And yes, that if it's a test, it's a pilot, then, we can look at how it goes. I also do appreciate that our municipality is not every other municipality, and that we do have an more elderly, more mature demographic, and that can impact things. But also, as Councillor Grenz was saying, it needs to be really clear, because obviously not every sidewalk is going to be cleared. And even for those of us who might be very able and mobile, when you get a lot of snow, there are places where, yes, we are going to be walking in the street, but there are some streets where it's extremely dangerous. I don't want to be walking in the street on Highway 19A because there's so much snow and ice on a sidewalk that you can't walk there. So obviously there are some areas where it is more, it's going to be a higher priority. One thing I would love to see our bylaw department do is, rather than, and I'm not saying that this always happens, but rather than waiting until the full 24 hours, but again, getting that message out to people that they're expected to be doing this and clearing this. And the more that can be done, then hopefully people don't wait until, well, now that 24 hours is up and now I better make sure it's shoveled. But so, yeah, I don't know what the clear answer, but communication is going to be really a bit tricky on this one, because obviously we don't want to be out there clearing every sidewalk. But those dangerous roads or the downtown area, and I'm sure that operations can identify where it needs to be done. So, yeah.
But yeah, bylaw can't get to them quickly because there's too much snow. They can't get down the sidewalk. It's true. It's true. You seen those little vans they drive? No. Can we wind this up? Okay. Okay, that's good. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Next is a request that has come to council from the PDBA board, and just with respect to expressing their concern around loss of parking as infill happens in the city. So if you recall, there was a previously approved temporary parking lot on the lots adjacent to the fire hall. When we actually went to tender on those, the cost was significantly higher than what was expected. And then a decision was made by council that for something that was temporary, it seemed like too much to be spending. So just bringing this back for council's direction, one, really to explore options that might exist in close proximity to the downtown core, including should there be pay parking, which, would be new and would be in addition to a fees and charges bylaw if we did that. We do have a healthy balance in our off-street parking reserve, I think about $775,000. So this is something that could be 100% funded from that reserve. So looking for council's direction, rough costs, maybe 110,000, but it also depends on what else is there. Does it have lighting? Is it paved or gravel? What kind of storm drainage is required? Obviously, every parcel is going to be a little bit different depending what we're looking at, but engineering has kind of provided, again, very rough estimate, about $6,500 per parking spot on a gravel parking lot with, you know, kind of that infrastructure, $8,500 per spot if it was paved. So those are, again, really rough numbers that they're just providing. This is more an exploratory type of thing, but wanting to provide ballpark numbers for you in terms of going ahead with that or not.
So is this in reference to city-owned land?
Right, this would be city-owned.
Try to be. Yes.
If I may, so there has been some discussions with council. But basically, I think what we want to do is identify some city-owned properties, and if there's existing tenants or leases or whatever it might be, then we would discuss that with them. But we've had some discussions in council that they want to look at using the off-street parking reserve to create some new spaces that would be close to the downtown. And so if we advance this to the financial plan, we would come back to council with a design and a location and work with any stakeholders that might be associated with any properties.
It's just a generic looking at what is a likely good fit.
Yes.
Right, and what we would do is put it in the financial plan with a cost and grant funding, so there's no impact to the property taxes. And including if council decided not to proceed with that at all, we can pull it out in the amended plan, and there's, again, no impact to property tax rates on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, Councillor Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering if the PDBA board has defined close proximity to the downtown core.
No, if I may, through the mayor, that's us defining what we believe is close. Yeah. So we have had
It
some
is.
discussions with council about some possible options, and then now that we're in the budget phase, staff would do a deeper review of what the feasibility is of different lands owned by the city. Potentially, I guess they could even come back and look at land that the city could acquire. But at this point, we're focusing on city-owned land as a priority and coming back to council with some more specific information for a 2025 project.
Okay, good. We're good on that?
Okay,
Let's move
Great.
forward on that one.
that one was
Yes.
fast, nice.
Yes.
Okay,
Great.
the mayor has asked for this to be brought forward, and that's to consider city cooling space options at the curling arena. So this would be summertime. The curling club lease expires in 2025. So this could be part of any discussions for renewal with them. And an estimated cost, again, really rough, $75,000. There may be funding that's available through EMCR or UBCM grants, perhaps a 2025 work plan project, and again, report back with options on this. So looking for direction or thoughts on that.
And to be clear, the mayor requested this as a curling club because there was no cost. To suggest that there's $75,000 and the mayor's actually withdrawing this request. Seriously, I mean, I just thought the curling club is there for a cooling center. The curling club is there and it's got no ice in it and it's not being used for curling in the summertime. There's a nice little place that has washrooms and so forth, but I'm not sure where the $75,000 came into play.
If I may, through you, I'll speak to
CEO
this.
Taylor, go ahead.
So this was what we had a rough estimate of adding AC and like making sure the HVAC and all of that is in there so that it could actually be a cooling center. But what we're suggesting is if council likes this idea, we would discuss with the curling club society as part of our renewal of their lease, and then look at basically funding that through the provincial ministries. So we believe that we can get funding to create cooling and warming spaces from the emergency management ministry. And they also would reimburse the curling arena for the use of that space. So we would have to negotiate that into the lease agreement so that they get, some cost recovery, I guess, out of that. So we're not suggesting that this is a done deal, but what we would need is council direction to explore it and come back to you with some options, talk to the curling folks about what timeframes might work, and then basically kind of go from there. So we were not really kind of expecting that the city would have to fund this. We have had quite good support from those two ministries, UBCM and EMCR, for emergency amenities or emergency infrastructure. So that was kind of the idea behind this one.
Okay, yeah, yes, thanks. Thanks for that clarification. When you said grants and funding in place by provincial agencies, I woke up again. Yeah, so I'm back on board. So I think it's great. It just came to me when we ran into the warming centers, you know, where and so forth, because, you know, our lack of city-owned buildings, but this curling arena, it kind of fell into that. And with that in mind, I think it's a good fit if it could, but, you know, once again, your work plan is enough to, you know, like everything else going on, but yes, but I'm not sure, or like in the financial plan, all that you're asking is this to be included into the work plan? You know, because there's going to be a certain amount of, you know, like I know Kate or Emo will be looking at grant funding type of thing, but is with staff time allowed is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, if I may, through you, just, I think that this kind of lands on our desk anyway. So we end up having to react, and I think it would be looked at as a regional thing.
Right.
If it is feasible, if we don't even necessarily know if we can accommodate it there. If the building is super drafty and there's no way to make it cool, I mean, I guess the ice could stay in and we could just put people in there. But I think it is just something that we would need direction from council to open the conversation, to talk with the current tenant, you know, work through some of the lease aspects of that, and then talk to the province about what that would actually look like. Maybe they have ideas that it doesn't need to be that much money and you don't need HVAC. I'm not sure, but we just don't really know what would be needed in the building to make it work for that purpose. And it would normally only be for a few days a year. But, you know, it's just something that had come up in discussion, and if council wants us to pursue that and rule it out or rule it in, I think we would need some consideration.
Right. And thank you for that. And that was exactly my point. It is only for a few days in the summer and only a few days in the winter type of thing. So the uses of it would be relatively minor, but at the same time, we have a building there, and instead every year when it snows or when it's hot, you know, like we are running around without a true plan in place. And this just kind of, we own it already, and it's vacant a lot of the time in the summer. I know the pickleballers use it, but you know, they can share. Anyways, yeah, I'll stop there. Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to clarify, staff, this will potentially be used as a warming center as well in the winter with a ice rink?
If I may, at the moment, we had just talked about cooling options because it is fully occupied in the winter months. And so that has been our challenge in trying to support our social service agencies. We don't have buildings that are not fully programmed. And so it's almost impossible to pivot with no notice for emergency purposes. But we do believe that during the hot summer months, there is that opportunity. And that's what we would want to discuss with the curling arena. Does that work? Or sorry, the curling society. Does that work? What does it look like? What type of stuff do you need to have in there to make it work for that purpose? And how do we fund that? And then how does that tenant get reimbursed for allowing that space to be used for that?
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Jenna.
Okay, this is the last item, and I'll call it one item because it is part of a conversation that at the end of the day is challenging. So like I say, this is something we can roll forward to November 18th, but I just wanted to give you an overview of some of the calculations and analysis that I've been doing. And I think one of the things to keep in mind with respect to our reserve contributions is it really is that our current infrastructure and assets, the renewal or replacement of those assets is required to maintain current service levels. So unless we're going to change the current service levels, I think it's prudent to have a plan for the renewal and replacement of those assets. This isn't talking about new assets that may be brought on board, but ones that are currently functional. And options for funding those, of course, are always property taxes or user rates for the utilities in the year of replacement. But of course, what that can lead to is we have a very significant increase in rates in any one year and perhaps a significant drop in a subsequent year. Reserves, less costly in the long run because we get the benefit of compound interest. And that can help with accumulating those funds. Obviously, the sooner you get started in building those funds, the sooner you can take advantage of that compound interest. The numbers in the analysis are quite shocking in the difference between contributing 10 years out as to now. And there's a variety of graphs I could show you on that. There's always the question of the generational equity around things like this. And that's more of a philosophical discussion. As you know, I feel like each year there should be a proxy for the use of that infrastructure for everybody that's using it. There's always MFA debt that has an administrative process in terms of public approval being required. Once you're committed to MFA debt, you're committed for the term of the loan, right? There's not an ability to have flexibility around that, which you have when it's your own reserves. You can choose not to use reserves and go with a grant instead. But once you've committed to the debt, then you're committed to those payments and the associated property tax increase on that. I've shown you the graphs before that if we're looking at saving for 10 years or paying down for 10 years, it's more money to have the debt, of course, because you're having to pay for the interest on that and you don't get the compound interest working in your favor. It goes the other way. And again, there's the question of generational equity. There are historically have been many municipalities that do all of their infrastructure using debt, and that's how they feel they accomplish that, is that everybody's paying debt every single year, and so we're square. So again, this is certainly open for discussion. And then lastly, kind of one of the significant things that Parksville's been able to take advantage of is grants. And we've been fortunate to have some pretty significant grants, say for the water treatment plant and other infrastructure, whether it's gas tax over the years and other grants. It's not always available, it's unpredictable, and it's not always available for all asset types, right? As you know, different grants have different eligible projects. So what I would say though is that grants used in concert with reserves can give council a lot of flexibility in that, yes, we have the reserves, but there's a grant available. So let's leave the reserves in the account and save it for another day. So the question around the funding then of the replacement of that infrastructure can be assumptions like, well, let's save to fund 50% of it, and then we'll look for grants or other means. Or maybe you decide for the very significant projects, you're going to use some debt and some reserves. So that's my kind of overview of why we should be looking at replacing our assets to maintain that level of service. So council has received recently 3 quite significant plans with respect to our asset management. The pavement assessment plan was received about a year and a bit ago. And in that, there was an identification of needing about 1.1 million invested in pavement each year, just to kind of keep on top of the maintenance of the pavement. We had typically only been investing about 500,000 per year. So last year we used Growing Communities Fund to do a big chunk of that and did some catch up, but that's still an ongoing item that was identified. The sewer master plan identified that it should be about 2.3 million per year for the sewer, and we're putting in about 375,000. Similarly, the water master plan identified about 4.1 million was required each year to renew and replace the infrastructure. And we're doing about 450,000 right now. So the numbers are starkly different. And as I suggested to you, I don't think this is something that happens overnight, but council did ask me to take a look at what would it take to get to those levels. And very rough numbers, to do each of those, say for the water, to get to 4.1 million per year, over 10 years would be a 1.5% property tax increase, similar to how we do that 0.5, a 1.5 compounded. At the end of 10 years, we would be at that 4.1 million. Similarly, for the sewer master plan, a 0.7% property tax increase, again, over 10 years would get us to that ballpark. And the pavement assessment would be about 0.5. So just those 3 would be a 2.7% tax increase. And we haven't yet got our transportation master plan, storm drainage, and then the other asset management plans that, as I've identified during this financial planning process, we haven't put money specifically aside for various facilities, but staff are working on all kinds of plans around that with respect to roofs and building envelope and things like that. So there's some really high level rough numbers that it would take to fund some of that. And I think these are kind of the most critical assets that we're talking about in terms of that service delivery. I think people always want to be able to turn on their water and flush their toilet and drive on their roads. And so it's important to first look at these critical assets in terms of ensuring that we're sustainably funding those and that rates and our property taxes are reflecting the use of those assets each year. Similarly, if we look at using debt financing for these, again, rough numbers right now, $1 million in MFA debt costs about 0.5% property tax increase each year for the 20 to 30-year term. So you can see that when you compare over to the other numbers, again, that analysis of what it would cost to put the money aside is cheaper than the debt. But right now, that's what it costs. Borrowing costs are coming down, so that likely becomes more favorable. But I think it's just about always that compound interest working for you will take you further than using the MFA debt. Sorry, where did my, yeah, there we go. Sorry. The other number that council had asked me to calculate was what would it cost to put in place reserve funding to save for the replacement of fire apparatus, another kind of critical service asset. In the 5-year financial plan right now, there's just about $2.6 million of apparatus and vehicles that need to be replaced. And again, these are on quite a strict cycle of replacement because it's required by the fire underwriters for our residents to be able to get their insurance and things like that. So with that amount, it would take about 1% of property tax, similar to our 0.5% we put aside for capital reserves. 1% of property tax per year levy would generate sufficient funds in 5 years. Those reserve funds, and here's where there can be an additional funding piece, is we will be able to add in DCC funds for fire departments now. And so those reserve funds could be supplemented with any DCC contributions once our bylaw is updated. And so that would be a decision at the time. What I would suggest is that for 5 years would allow us to finance that. I think at that point, once you start building a reserve in that number could probably come down once you get into a longer term cycle. Always when you're starting these reserves, if you have purchases that are needed in the short term, there needs to be a bit of a momentum to begin with for that. And I believe that would be the case here. Again, if we were to use debt servicing for that level of purchase, it would be about a 1.1% increase with a 20-year payment commitment. Now, that's a little bit simplified in that there's about 4 or 5 different purchases in the 5 years. So we would have to take a look at that. So that's one calculation that council had asked for that certainly would be my recommendation. The fire apparatus, because of its predictable replacement, more so than any of our other assets, I would suggest, is one that I think most municipalities actually calculate and put aside for because it has some pretty significant implications if we don't replace those assets.
Jetta?
Yeah.
I'm going to make a suggestion here. I'm cognizant of the time. I'm also cognizant of I'm seeing some energy waning that's going on right here. I would actually like to stop now and put this on hold. I'd like to wrap up the rest of the council meeting, if I may.
Sure.
With no disrespect to your presentation.
Absolutely
but
not.
I believe it's not getting the attention that perhaps it's needed. And so plus I recognize that there's other items on our agenda that I want to wrap up this council meeting. We're getting up to the magic hour of 5 o'clock. And there's no guarantee that we can continue on after that. So I would really like to, if I can put your presentation on hold and go with the rest of the council meeting, including we have an in-camera session as well. So I would like to get that wrapped up. And if we get to feel that there's enough time left, and if council decides to go past the 4-hour limit type of thing, then I will ask you back. Does that work okay?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I fully understand that the magnitude of these amounts is likely something council wants to consider in light of all the other items anyway. So it's certainly something we could just quite easily defer till the 18th meeting and not even revisit it today, if you would just prefer to receive it in the context of everything else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. That's a good option that we
Yeah.
can maintain as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for council. Yeah, I just feel that it's important that we finish our agendas that we have ahead of us right now. So we we have the bylaws at point 4 of the agenda here. 3 readings and final adoption of the zoning and development amendment bylaw 2024, number 2000.150 for the small lot residential at Hickey Avenue. Do I have a mover or seconder for the recommendations as noted? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Grunz. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That carries unanimous. Thank you. Any notices of motion for future council meeting? Being none, moving on. Liaison reports. We have now moving to liaison reports. Let's start with Councillor Martin. We're going to reverse the alphabet today. There you go, Councillor Martin. You get to start.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the PDBA, the Imagine Parksville program that they've got their grant for, they've got a report that they will be getting. The consultant report will be in January. They've decided that they would rather do this than have it come in November, December with Christmas and everything that's happening for the business people. So the holiday season. And so that's why it'll be coming in January. The professional report will be coming sometime. I don't know when in January yet, but it'll be in January, which is significant when we're some of the things we're talking about today, you know, so that report will be coming then. Also, the museum had a whale of a time. On the 26th, they had the Halloween event, and they gave out 3,800 pieces of candy, estimated 500 kids. This has become a major community event. We had people coming from Nanaimo and Campbell River. Everyone had fun. It was excellent, they said. So I thought that would be interesting to pass that on. You know, it's wonderful to have children involved with a museum.
Oh,
If you understand that, I know.
great opportunity.
I've taken my grandchildren to museums in other towns when we were traveling, and they were so fascinated by it all. So this is an introduction. So it's ideal. So I just
Thank you.
pass those 2 liaison reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be very, very quick here, but I will mention a couple of things. With Bylaws Secondary School, people may be aware that students were out helping, working with staff and planting trees in the wetland area. So much appreciated there. I'd also like to mention, for the benefit of council, to know that the city of Parksville does offer a scholarship to students from Bylaws Secondary, and presently it is for $500. And I mentioned that because I know that budget talks are coming up, continuing, and maybe that's something we want to look at. I'm not bringing forth a notice of motion at this time, but I don't believe that that amount has increased very much, if at all, over a number of years. So I mentioned that. I will move along with the Chamber of Commerce. I did have a meeting recently with the board of the Chamber of Commerce, and where we talked about the market plans and just going over the process that the city requires whenever there's an event, and following that process is absolutely the best way to have success with events. And had some follow-up emails as well with the executive director regarding that. And I believe they're coming forward about another item in the next couple of days. The Arts Council, I will skip that for now and move to the library. I just want to mention that when we did have that recent event here where the smoke filled this area and people needed to vacate, that of course that affected the library as well. That library was not actually mentioned in the local news as being one of the areas that was affected, but they of course had to vacate. And fortunately though, the materials, obviously with books and magazines and the like, concerns about smoke effect are very real, but nothing was damaged there. And there were some issues around the book drop, which worked, and so people weren't sure what they should do. I did meet briefly with the manager of the library, and she really wanted to pass along thanks to city staff who really helped with situations where people were trying to drop off and return books. There was great consternation or concern expressed by the patrons when they were allowed to come back the couple of days later. And so that just all to say that they went through that fairly well, but it was certainly a little upheaval, but they do have all kinds of plans in place for any emergency events. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beal. Council, I got to the point where we go into special business. Do I have a mover or seconder for the recommendation pursuant to section 91E of the Community Charter? Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider an item relating to the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land. Moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That is unanimous.